Good evening. We'll call the school committee meeting for August 16th to order. The agenda from an order of execution perspective is we're going to start after this portion by being an executive session. We expect that to last for about 30 to 45 minutes with regards to ongoing litigation. We will then come back and execute the training that we promised the community we would execute back on the 22nd of July, which is involving public and student records. That should take about 45 minutes as well, which brings us to 8:30, more or less, at which point we'll move into routine matters, including public comment, if there is anything for those that are not on the agenda. As a reminder, public comment includes providing your name and address, and it's generally limited to 3 minutes or so per person. We then have the consent agenda. Any reports, which I expect will probably be relatively minimal today, based upon some updates that we're probably going to have more on Thursday, and Dr. Milczewski will give some brief update on that. We'll move into the appointment of the Director of Finance, which I think many of us are excited about, and then move into the first reading of policy EBCFA, which is our face coverings policy. I am wearing this right now because technically that policy is still active. And I realized that as I was reading it through. It's nothing else for anybody else to read into, just that it's still active. And then we will have a brief discussion about a liaison assignment for the school committee to the Reading Coalition of Prevention and Support. So that is the order of the evening. And Mr. Brent, do we have a motion?
Yes, move to enter executive session pursuant to Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21A3, to discuss strategy with respect to litigation when an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the litigating position of the public body, and the chair so declares, and to return to open session at approximately 7:45 p.m.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Aaron. Since it's executive session, it is a roll call vote. So we'll call names and get our votes. Sarah?
Aye.
Aaron?
Aye.
Sean?
Aye.
Chuck? Aye. Carla?
Aye.
Tom? Aye. We are adjourned to executive session. back to order at 7:34. And we will commence to the training on student records and public records. And Colby, our counsel, is here to walk us through this.
Great, so I'm just going to stand. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me tonight.
There's a lectern back there because they might need to hear you they will need to hear you from the public side.
Perfect. So what I'm here to do is just to talk briefly about the laws regarding student records, just to give an overview of what the laws are, what they say, and how they apply. So you can move to the first slide if you'd like. So the two main laws that govern student records are FERPA, which is the Family Educational Rights Privacy Act of 1974 and its regulations, and then the Mass Student Records Regulations, which are found at 603 CMR 2300. And FERPA defines student record fairly broadly. And so the term educational records means those records that are directly related to a student and maintained by the educational agency. So of course, this was 1974 that FERPA came into effect. Things have changed greatly with how we maintain student records. So now it's not just paper records, but of course, electronic records come into play as well. Okay, Massachusetts defines a student record as the transcript. That is, pretty much a transcript is what you think about a kiddo that receives the records from Reading High School that's going to say what they took for 9th grade, 10th grade, junior year, senior year. That's the transcript. The temporary record is anything else, again, that is all information is organized on the basis of the student's name or in a way that such student may be individually identified and is maintained by the school district. And so the location and the physical forms of records is irrelevant. So you might have, if you have a child who receives special education services, they will have records that are maintained sometimes in the special education department, and then they will also have records that exist at their school. So when we look at it, the records that exist at the school might be MCAS information, the cumulative file, attendance, grades, and whatnot. All of that, though, comprises of the student record. So it's not, we don't talk about really special education record or nurses records or school-based records. It's student records, and it's under the temporary, what we consider here in Massachusetts to be the temporary record. Okay? And so the transcript basically contains administrative records that constitute the minimum data necessary to reflect the student's educational progress and to operate the educational system. We have, typically on the transcript, name, address, phone number, the birth date, the name, address, and phone numbers of the guardian, and of course the titles, grades, or equivalent grades when grades are not applicable, course credit, grade level completed, and years completed. Again, think of it like, your college transcript, your high school transcript that reflects what you took as your academic course load during that period of time. And the temporary record basically shall consist of all information in the student record which is not contained in the transcript. And this information clearly shall be of importance to the educational process. So that's the key when sometimes we have to determine if something is a student record. That is another aspect if it has to be of importance to the educational process. This typically includes standardized tests, so your MCAS scores, whatnot, class rank, extracurricular activities, evaluations by teachers, counselors, and other school staff. So now access to student records. So the purpose of your student records laws and regulations are to protect the privacy of the students and also to have to clarify the access with respect to parent and guardian and third parties. So basically, who's entitled to access to a student record? An eligible student, that is a student who is 14 years old or has reached grade 9. Custodial parents. Eligible non-custodial parents and authorized school personnel with an educational interest in accessing the student record. And that could include outside contractors as well. So a couple quick notes is with respect to custodial parents and non-custodial parents, the student records laws in Massachusetts, they've come under some kind of scrutiny too on this issue where they define a custodial parent. So a custodial parent is defined as the parent with physical custody, who the child resides with. In many cases in divorces, you have parents that have shared legal custody, and one parent might have sole physical custody. But the records laws talk about if you have a parent with the shared legal custody, you still need to provide notice to the custodial parent, the parent with physical custody, and the non-custodial parent, the parent who does not have physical custody, of their rights to access the records. What I do typically advise, and I've set up form letters, is I think, and all your principals have those, is that when they do get a request, there's a form letter that we need to send out by law that is for the parent, for both parents to receive in order to access the student records. And so, unfortunately, I think that the probate court definition of custody is different from the student records regulation definition of custody, because legal custody denotes that the parents share educational decision-making rights as they share medical decision-making rights and religious and whatnot. The authorized school personnel with an educational interest in the records, meaning that someone who works for the Reading Public Schools, who has an interest in being able to access those records. So that would be, teachers, counselors, but they have to have an educational interest into what is in those records. Okay?
Tom. Colby, in terms of custodial parents, if mom and dad are separated, does the stepmom have to have access or be granted access to the child's information?
It depends on what the custodial paperwork, the temporary orders out of the probate and family courts say. When we look at custodial parents, it's biological parents, it's legal guardians, so it depends on what, a lot of times families will come up with a legal agreement between the parties, and that might include access to, someone else. I see a lot of times with grandparents and whatnot, so it would have to be something that's more prescribed.
Thank you.
Okay?
Colby had one as well. The contractor side of this last bullet, is that something that a contractor employed by the district, or is that some outside organization that we might be contracting with, we might need an MOA or MOU with? How inclusive is this contractor definition?
It depends on what our contract is with that provider and what their relationship is to that student. So sometimes you do contract with people that might be providing a service to the student. They would absolutely be covered in that. If it's a general contractor, maybe not.
So somebody providing service to the district, like a coalition for prevention and support, would that be covered under this section?
I would need to take a look at whatever contracts we entered into and what specifically they're providing to the student to determine whether or not they are personnel with educational interest.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay, so access to third parties, generally, all others are considered third parties, and they do not have access to the student record without prior written consent of the parent or the eligible student. However, sometimes we do have third parties that can have access to the student record. So one example is the Department of Children and Families, DCF, a probation officer, a justice of any court, or the Department of Youth Services under the provisions of MGL Chapter 119, Section 51B, 57, 69, and 69A. We also, upon the lawfully issued subpoena, providing that notice was given to the parent. So if there's a subpoena that comes in that's requesting student records, what we do is you send a letter to the parent saying we received this subpoena. Absent a motion to quash that subpoena, then we will provide the records. So that's another way that we can do it. Also, federal, state, and local educational officials and their authorized agents. When we look at this, typically it's the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, the Office of Civil Rights. Those organizations would have access to student records without the prior authorization. Okay? Directory information. This is a school may release the following information without prior consent. Student's name, address, telephone number, date and place of birth, major field of study, dates of attendance, weight and height of members of athletic teams, class, participation in officially recognized activities and sports, degrees, honors, awards, and post-secondary high school plans. However, before a school releases this information, must give the public notice that it releases this type of information, and then inform parents and eligible students of their right to opt out. And I've cited to an advisory there for further information to any committee members who would like to see that. With respect to bullying, this is the regulations. This is 603 CMR 49.07, which are our regulations regarding bullying. And a principal may not disclose information from a student record of a target or an aggressor to a parent unless the information is about the parent's own child. Okay, so the only information can be released to a parent is whether it's involving the parent's own child. Principal may disclose information about the determination of bullying or retaliation to local law enforcement agency without consent of the student or his or her parent. The principal shall communicate with law enforcement officials in a manner that protects the privacy of targets, student witnesses, and aggressors to the extent practicable in the circumstances. And a principal may disclose student record information about a target or an aggressor to appropriate parties in addition to law enforcement with connection with a health or safety emergency if the knowledge of that information is necessary to protect the health and safety of the student or other individuals. This is very limited, and it has to have an immediate and significant threat to the health and safety of the student or the other individuals. That period of time is limited to the period of the emergency, does not allow for a blanket disclosure of student record information, and the principal must document the disclosure and the reasons that the principal determined that a health or safety emergency exists. It's a very high standard there. Student health records. Student health records are part of the student's temporary record, and pursuant to the student records regulation, they are protected from disclosure to third parties without the written consent of the eligible parent or the student. These records are accessible to the student, eligible student, the student's parents or guardians, and authorized school personnel. And Massachusetts health laws provide special confidentiality protection for specific records. HIV status is one that comes to mind. And then here we are. And a healthcare provider cannot disclose information about a person's AIDS or HIV status without specific, informed, written consent of the individual. School nurses keep this information in a separate confidential part of the health record as personal nursing notes.
Colby on, Sean, go ahead.
Colby, I was just going to ask, is this in here just as an example, or is this sort of the example of something that's carved out and kept separately?
This is carved out and kept separately.
Okay.
And are there other health records that are, I mean, so that point, I guess, to build on that, does evaluation results fit here, or does it fit in the previous category? That's not a student health record, it's just it's a part of the greater.
It's part of the temporary student record that's protected from disclosure under the student records laws and regulations.
Temporary.
It's not kept in a separate, this is kept in a separate file marked confidential. The student evaluation information would be kept within the temporary student record, but again, there's limited people who can access that: eligible parent, eligible student, authorized school personnel.
I don't know whether, maybe a stupid question, but does the requester have to have permission from both the student and the parent, or can both of them, or one or the other?
If the student is under the age of 18, it would be from the parent. Once the student turns 18, the student is actually the keeper of his or her student records, absent a guardianship of an adult by the parents.
Is it 18 or 14? Where's the, what's
You become an eligible student to be able to view your record, to be able to access your student record at the age of 14. You then cannot give consent to others to view it until you are 18, when you are then the keeper of your record.
Yeah, that's what I was.
Okay, thank you.
A lot of questions about Hipaa and student records. So since the passage of Hipaa, there's been a lot of confusion as to which records are considered protected health information and subject to Hipaa protection, and which records are really considered protected under FERPA. The general rule is that school records, student records are under FERPA and not considered protected health information or Hipaa. And so you can find further information from the Department of Public Health on this issue with respect to FERPA and the intersection with Hipaa. But generally, Hipaa does not apply in a school setting. It is student records regulations that are controlling. And immunization information, and this is just a question that I thought was important. So is an authorization required before physicians and other covered providers are permitted under Hipaa to disclose information and records related to a patient's immunization status to the public schools, its agents, including school nurses? And the answer is from DPH is no. An authorization is not required before physicians and other covered providers disclose information or records related to the patient's immunization status to a school and its agents, including school nurses. Under Hipaa, healthcare providers are permitted to disclose immunization records without individual authorization to public health authorities that are authorized by law to collect such information. And then I cited the CMR regulation that provides that school nurses are authorized to obtain from healthcare providers the immunization records or other immunization-related information required for school admission without authorization of the child's parent and legal guardian.
Would be appropriate for some future conversations.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
So for purposes of these laws, the purpose of these laws is to give parents and students the right to privacy, inspection, amendment, and destruction of student records. And the student records regulations really go through all of those issues about privacy, who's authorized to view the record, inspection, same. Amendment, there's ways to amend the student record, and then the destruction of the student record. So some key points to take away from all this is that student records are more of a concept than a place. So don't get hung up on, are the records in the special education office, the school office? You look and say, what are the records? The contents of the records will dictate the characterization of whether it is a student record or not. When the record physically resides and is not necessarily, where the record physically resides is not necessarily controlling. So like I said, you can have special education records, cumulative student records, health records, discipline records, records that are electronically stored. It's all a part of the student record. So you have to go back and look at what's the definition of a student record, educational importance, specifically noting the child, and being maintained by the schools. Documents that are transitory may not necessarily be a student record. So like say student work product. So a student's paper that they wrote in English class wouldn't necessarily be a student record, it'd be more of a student work product because we're not maintaining all those temporary records. Okay, so destruction, this one always throws people off. The transcript may only be destroyed 60 years after the student's graduation, transfer, or withdrawal. So transcripts we keep for 60 years.
Where do we store those, Tom?
Computers.
Haven't learned that yet.
In a basement somewhere down here.
Exactly. Now, the temporary record must be destroyed no later than 7 years after graduation, transfer, or withdrawal. At the time of graduation, transfer, or withdrawal must provide the eligible student parent with a written notice of the approximate date of destruction and the right to receive that information in whole and in part. So schools can go, 7 is the outside line for how long you can keep it. Schools can keep it less than 7 years, but we have to provide notice to the parent and the eligible student of when the date of destruction is. So a student graduates in 2022 and we say we hold it for 5 years, then your record will be destroyed in 2027, okay?
Is that from date of graduation? So
It's from either date of graduation, date of transfer, date of withdrawal.
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
Sorry,
second.
just one more on that. It says that we must provide the eligible student and parent with written notice of the date of destruction, right to receive the information in whole or part. Many students are going to have reached 18 by the time they graduate. Do we still notify the parent? Do
Yes.
we still have the right to receive that information at that point?
yes, we do.
Okay.
Yes, because even after a student turns 18, the parents still have the right to inspect the student record.
Okay.
Okay, so more on the destruction of student records. This is from DESE on this. Can you destroy a record by handing the student, the parent, the only copy, but must give them written notice that this is the only copy and the student's way of disposing of it? So you can provide the record to them, but they have to know that this is it, this is the only copy we have, and now you have it. And announcing the destruction of the record in the local newspaper does not satisfy the written requirement. we had, with some of these change, a lot of school districts were dealing with some very old records. And then the question was, can we just publish it in the newspaper? And DESE said, no, you cannot.
So on that, is there a best efforts? Well, if you no longer have the address of the parent or the child or anything else, what's the best efforts guidance?
Best efforts guidance is mail the notice to the last address. And I always say, why not post it in the paper as well? Just so that you're reaching as many people as you can. But you can't rely solely on notice in the newspaper.
Just not solely.
Here's some additional resources about records maintenance here by the state with respect to electronic records and generally your records retention manual.
You can see that or not.
Yeah, no. But I'll make my way through it. So these are some changes that occurred in January of 2017 with respect to the public records law. So now we have to have a records access officer. So we have to designate one or more persons as the RAO. The school district may choose to coordinate responses through the city or town. The RAO or may choose to decide and designate a district-wide RAO, which is what Reading did. That Reading has that now in person. The duties of this individual include coordinating the district's response to public records requests, assist individuals seeking public records in identifying the pertinent records, assist the custodian of records in preserving public records, prepare guidelines for requesters, and to the extent feasible, post commonly available public records or documents on websites. Electronic records, we must provide public records to the requester in an electronic format unless a record is not available in that format or the requester is unable to receive or access the records in that format. With respect to response times, it used to be that the records custodian responds to a written request within 10 calendar days, may permit inspection or furnish a copy without reasonable delay. Changes now is that the RAO must generally permit inspection or furnish a copy within 10 business days following receipt of a written request. If the RAO is unable to comply with this deadline due to the magnitude of the documents requested or difficulty of the request because of multiple requests by the same requesters, the RAO may inform the requester in writing of its intent to respond within 25 business days of receipt of the request, so allow for additional time. The RAO may also petition the supervisor of records for a time extension in some circumstance and for relief from responding to a series of contemporaneous requests that are frivolous and designed to intimidate or harass, and are not intended for the broad dissemination of information about public or government activities. So those are some changes that came with this. With respect to fees, it used to be 5 cents for black and white paper copies or computer printouts for both single and double-sided copies, and the district may charge actual expenses so long as it's reasonable. Changes to that came with 5 cents for black and white copies or computer printouts for both single and double-sided copies, no charge for segregation or redacted unless required by law, so student record information would be covered under that, or approved by the supervisor of public records, so you can also appeal to them. If a municipality's population is 20,000 or less, the RAO may access a fee equal to the hourly rate of the lowest paid employee with the skills to respond to the request not to exceed $25 an hour. If the municipality's population is greater than 2,000, must waive the fee for the first 2 hours spent responding to the request, and the supervisor of public records again may approve some exceptions to that. And then the requester may appeal a petition to the supervisor of public records. Change here is the requester may file with the supervisor of records who will issue a determination within 10 business days, and courts may enforce the statute. So those were some of the big highlighted changes from the law.
Aaron,
Who is the supervisor of records?
It's a state function.
State level. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, are there any further questions from the committee? Okay, seeing none, I guess that covers us.
And of course, if anyone has any further questions for me, I'm happy to assist via the superintendent or the chairman with any further questions.
I have one more, Colby. To the extent feasible, post commonly available public records documents on the website. What's your, I don't want you to get into legal guidance, but what's the best practice there?
You know,
In terms of what's commonly available?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things that I see most often, frankly, is our contracts. So you have like, teacher contracts and whatnot. So, any CBAs, any collective bargaining agreements, you have your bargaining units. People are doing a very good job of posting minutes, agendas, all of that from school committee, policies, certain things like that. I'm certainly happy to work with you and with Tom about other documents that you think should be posted onto the website as commonly requested documents.
Thank you. Okay, Colby, thank you so much for your time.
All right, thank you, everyone. Have a great night.
Thanks, Colby.
And it looks like we are ahead of schedule now, which is good. So we will jump to the routine matters. This is a period of time when we have public comment for items not on the agenda. And for those of you that have joined us, first of all, thank you and welcome. You should have seen in the back that there was a sign-in sheet for name and address. Public comment on our policy BEDB does require us to ask for name and address as part of that process. It also limits the public comment per person to about 3 minutes. Those same policies will apply generally when we start talking about other items on the agenda, which many of you may be here for, in terms of context. But when we talk about those other items, the committee will have the discussion first, and we'll conclude our discussion. At that point, we'll ask to see if there's anybody in the public who has comments to add to that, just so you know the order of operations. Okay? So with that said, is anybody here for public comment for anything not on the agenda? Yes, sir.
Thanks, Tom. Chris Haley, 71 Tennyson Road. I'm raising both of my daughters to always do the right thing in various scenarios that, within their educational level currently. So in pointing out things that, are the right thing, I want to highlight the fact that a resident who just recently moved to Reading, Sharilla Lestrade, had posted on social media about you guys' retreat that you had visiting the Metco neighborhoods down in Boston. So I'd like to applaud you guys for the out-of-the-box kind of thinking that, since that hasn't been done before, I really have high hopes for this school district going forward with that kind of, like I said, out-of-the-box thinking. So I really appreciate you guys for taking time out and doing that. I think it sets the tone for where the schools are going forward, and I will always point out when you guys are doing something correct or incorrect. So going off of that, I had sent an email to you guys about the 625 Main Street flood and the street fair, that I was going to be having a dunk tank for that for members of the select board as well as the school committee. And so far, Carla, Tom, and Erin have replied to that, as well as Mark and Carlo on the select board side. So pending anybody else joining, I would like to extend it to Dr. Milachevsky, if he'd like to participate, as well as other members in the community, maybe the police and fire chief, et cetera, going forward, just so. It really all depends. Maybe the line for me is around the corner, maybe it isn't, but if it is, that's just more money that's getting raised for a good cause. So thank you guys for that. And then lastly, when I got home today, I received a letter that was sent on August 13th from Dr. Milachevsky, once again doing the right thing and owning up to something that he was not responsible for in his purview. It wasn't done during his tenure here, and he is a class act by accepting responsibility for something that he bears no responsibility for. I just want the record to show what is contained in contained in the letter that he sent, the attachments to it are not accurate as they sit today on a certain website. So it's actually doing more harm than good the way that it remains up there now compared to the way that it is in this letter. So without getting into more details about it, if you would like to speak to me after about it, I will gladly assist you because something has to be corrected with it. And once again, if one of 5 people, even a member on this committee, had done the exact same thing I started off this public comment with, I wouldn't be standing here right now. Thank you guys for your time.
Thank you. Was there another hand I saw? Yes, Miss, please.
I didn't know how many of you would be here, and I only have 4. So you'll have to excuse me because I'm extremely nervous and I've never done this before.
Don't even worry.
So,
We'll make sure one of us gets it to Samantha.
thank you.
Yes.
We can share.
And the rest of it here is the documentation and data that I have.
Is this regarding the mask policy? Can we wait until the mask discussion? That's a topic on the agenda.
Tonight?
Yes.
Okay, sure, I can wait for that.
Okay.
Should I leave that out there?
We'll take it up here, that's
Thank
fine,
you.
but thank you for that. Okay. Any other public comment for items not on the agenda? Okay, so we'll move on. Do we move on to the consent agenda? And do we have a motion?
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Seconded by Chuck. Is there any feedback, comments, corrections, or anything else? No? Okay, so by hand vote, since we're all here, we don't need to do roll call. By hand vote, those in favor of the consent agenda? Those opposed? And we have a 6-0 vote. All right, so we're moving on to reports now. We don't have a student assigned yet. I'm sure Mr. Tracy's already working on that. Dr. Milczewski, do you have anything else you want to share?
Well, good evening, everyone. It's nice to see you. I'd like to just start by saying, walking into the building tonight, I heard the band playing and saw many student athletes out training. It's just could feel the buzz of the school year starting up. So just wanted to say my favorite time of the year and also just the excitement building as you sort of come into the building. I'd like to quickly just talk about what's coming on Thursday. So Thursday night, I'll be speaking about just our some of the work we've been doing as a leadership team over the summer. That includes some of our work as a school committee and administrative team at our retreat that happened at Ecott College, and also a recent leadership retreat that Mr. Haley referred to a trip to Boston to better understand sort of the experiences of our Boston residents. So I'll be speaking about some of the work we've been doing. I'll also be diving in detail about some of our plans for the opening of schools. I sent out a memo on Friday that had some initial guidance on some topics that were of interest. So while I know the committee will be talking about masking tonight, on Thursday I will also be talking about testing, lunches, distancing, quarantine protocols, visitor protocols, things like that, with the goal of talking about them on Thursday and then sharing sort of something in writing out with the community on Friday. Would like to say that that's going to be the result of a collaboration between a lot of community stakeholders, especially our interim health director, Peter Morandi, and also our director of nursing, Mary Juliana. The themes that we'll be talking about, we looked at all of the community feedback that was shared through the recent opening survey. We had 536 responses. We bucketed all of the different responses and questions into themes, and therefore we've organized our guidance, according to the themes that you all shared. So that will be coming on Thursday. Just wanted everyone to know that as we dive into one specific mitigation strategy tonight, and that's masking. Something else we'll be talking about in this report is also just some of the innovations that the community felt or adjustments that we did as a school district in response to COVID that worked. And we'll be talking about some of those that we'll try to continue this year to play off of the things that worked, even in a little bit of a different context. So just wanted to preface that will be coming on Thursday and then also shared out in writing on Friday. So thank you.
Okay. Any committee liaison reports, Carla?
Thanks, Tom. I attended a Board of Library Trustees meeting on the 9th. They talked about policy, seems to be a popular subject. They are doing a space review to try and prioritize needs, office space, small group meeting space and their collection space. They posted the social justice position at the beginning of August, and they're awaiting applications. Amy Lannon, during her director's report, talked about student internships, which was really interesting, how she is looking forward to having paid student internships for Reading and Boston students, and I brought up internships for credit, so I connected her with Curtis as well on that. On August 12th, I attended the trip into Boston. There was probably about 15 of us, district leadership, principals, assistant principals, directors. It was an awesome day. Thank you for inviting us. It was a really good day. We met a lot of families. We kind of got a feel for what the students' day would be like. We ended up in Medco headquarters and spoke with the director there, who was a firecracker. I liked her a lot. Curtis did a great job putting it together, and it was really nice to kind of spend time with the staff one-on-one. So I think I know them all now. I've only been here for a year. So thank you for inviting us, Tom.
Okay, Chuck? No report. John? No report. Aaron?
No report.
And Sarah?
No report.
Okay. I have no report myself either. I was going to highlight what Carla already highlighted. I felt it was more appropriate for her to highlight it as well. And Mr. Henley, thank you for the comment on that, because I agree it was great to see, and it was great to see the positive news that came out of that. I'll just say it's a continuation of positive. I think we've seen a lot of that so far this summer, and I know the energy is very high, so it's great to see. Then we'll move on in the agenda to the personnel action section, and we have the appointment of the Director of Finance, and Dr. Milszewski, you want to introduce us and talk us through the topic a little bit?
Great. So at the July 22nd school committee meeting, we walked through the process and timeline, which was ultimately approved by the school committee for how we would approach the Director of Finance search. Tonight I'm going to talk through just how the process played out, and then also share the name of the candidate who we would like to recommend for appointment. So first, I'd like to start by thanking the screening committee. I think our screening committee was comprised of the various constituencies that will work most closely with this role. So first, our HR director who facilitated this process, Michelle Roach, our two school committee reps, Aaron Gaffin, Tom Wise, our principal rep, Joanne King, our RTA rep, Eric Goldstein, our town accountant, Sharon Angstrom, our school business assistant, Carrie Kearns, two FinCom member representatives, Ed Ross and Jeffrey Coram, and also two parent reps, Teresa Arndt and Kevin Briere. Thank you to everyone who took the time and effort and energy to serve on that screening committee. It is a really strong screening committee that I think was able to add a lot of expertise and experience into vetting the candidates. So there were 4 candidates who applied, all 4 who were very strong candidates. So all 4 were put in front of the screening committee. The screening committee, after 4 interviews with each, narrowed the list down to 2 and recommended 2 to move forward to myself and the rest of our leadership team. The leadership team and I interviewed with each of those finalists, and then today I would like to recommend Susan Botan as our candidate for a Director of Finance. So I'm going to share a little bit about Susan. Susan has been previous to her 16 years in public education. She spent 8 years in the private nonprofit world in program development and marketing. In her 16 years in public education, she has served as a finance administrator, as an assistant superintendent for business and finance, and then most recently as the director of finance and operations in the Wayland Public Schools from 2014 to 2021. She is not only someone who is really strong in the financial world, but she's also an educator at heart. She has an undergraduate degree in elementary education, a master's degree in early childhood development studies, and then also her MBA. She's one of 16 school business administrators in Massachusetts that's also a certified national school finance official, and she has been on the MASBO board of directors. I'd like to share a little bit too just about things that really resonate with us throughout the process of getting to know Susan. One of her former bosses, her superintendent, shared that she's one of the most insightful and effective people with whom I've ever worked. Assistant Superintendent, one of her colleagues shared, her skills, knowledge, leadership, and kindness cannot be matched. And then lastly, another assistant superintendent shared, if you went to just about any staff member or official in the district, from school board chair to classroom teacher to building principal, and asked who the most respected person in the district was, they would without a doubt all answered Susan Baton. We've, as an administrative team, have found a few qualities that really stuck out to us in the process that aligned with sort of the job description and what we felt our team needed. First, she is someone who's very candid. She wants feedback and she loves to give feedback. She's someone who's hardworking. She has been an integral part of several different leadership teams, and in the last year helped navigate and lead Wayland through some, the COVID sort of challenges that we all faced. She is a collaborator, is someone who has been a strong member of several different teams. She is student-driven, so anyone who was on our involved with Susan throughout this process could share just how many times she references students and what's in the best needs of students. She even describes her own role as her job is to remove barriers for teachers, principals, and students. And we also felt that she is someone who's very strong at managing disagreement and conflict, which we think just in any sort of leadership role is really important. And then the last thing I would like to share about her, she really wants to be in Reading. We know that our leadership team wanted someone who we felt like wanted to be here. She feels that this is the right fit for her. She is really intrigued by some of the strengths and things that we have in place, and also really excited about some of the potential challenges ahead. And I couldn't think of a better person to join our leadership team and to help take our district forward. So I am absolutely thrilled tonight to be able to bring a candidate of her experience and her caliber here in front of the school committee. So I'd like to move forward and open it up for discussion.
Okay, so before we move forward and open to discussion, let's start with a motion, and we'll work away from there.
Move to appoint Susan Baton as Director of Finance pursuant to Mass General Law, Chapter 71, Section 41, and pending successful contract negotiations.
Do I have a second? Second. Okay, so let's open any discussion, any questions, any comments? Aaron?
No questions. I am absolutely beyond thrilled to hear that Susan wants to come to Reading. Having been on the screening committee, she knocked it out of the park. I couldn't have envisioned a better fit for this team at this time right now, and for what I think Reading needs in this position. So I'm thrilled, like beyond thrilled.
Any other members? All right, I'll just say a few words then too. Obviously, as Tom mentioned, I had the opportunity to be part of the committee too. Wasn't expected, but it was good to be there. And I've had a chance to sit down with Gail as well. And so before I say anything about Susan, I just want to once again thank Gail for her time. She's done a lot for this district over the last 5 or 6 years, helping to reestablish trust with many things from a financial perspective. She's done a phenomenal job in that regard, and she will be missed when she leaves. With that said, I couldn't possibly be more excited about Susan as well than I am, and I'm not one who gives praise like that so easily necessarily, as some of you know. So the interview process, as Aaron said, she knocked it out of the park. I fortunately had a chance to sit down with her face-to-face with Tom and Michelle today as well and talk through things. And I think a core theme that we're seeing from the administration team and why she fits is energy, right? She's so excited, she's looking forward to it, and she knows her stuff, bottom line, top to bottom. I can be a little bit technical at times, and I ask questions that are a little bit technical, and she was the only one who hit my question from the beginning to the end. And I think it will help continue that trust question with the community. It will continue to foster and build trust with the community when it comes to the financial side of things, which is just as important as anything. And I am excited to, bring her on board. And she very much seemed excited to bring on board as well. She was talking about driving through Reading and looking at the houses in the town and, all that kind of fun stuff as she was coming here as well. Having been in Wayland for 7 years, there's a pretty interesting similarity between Wayland and us from a community perspective. Prior to that, you didn't mention it, but she was in Lexington before that for a little bit as well. And she's done great work in both places. So I think she'll be a wonderful fit for this team. And I think it's so encouraging that we're able to bring that caliber person in a search like this. If we step back and say, Could you possibly have had somebody better in a search like this, or even in a search that was at quote-unquote the ideal time? I don't think we could have. And sometimes the theoretical stars just align. If we had, she would not have been available if we did a search in June, right? She was available now because this time it was the right time, the right person for this team, and I'm excited for that and where we're going with that. With that said, any other questions or comments? Okay. Looking out there, none? And you got to meet her too, so. Okay. All right, so with that said, we don't need a roll call, we'll do hand vote again. So all in favor of the appointment of Susan to the Director of Finance role? And we have a 6-0 vote. Those opposed, and 0. So there we go. Okay, so we are now ahead of schedule. But with that said, I think it's prudent to continue because this topic could be one that's a longer topic. And we're moving on to the new business, which is the first reading of policy EBCFA, face coverings. And I'll take that down first. Move my mouse over. Before we start getting into the nitty-gritty, Sean, do you have a policy, a motion for us?
I do. Move to accept the first reading of policy EBCFA on face coverings.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay. Do you want to start reading?
Start reading, yeah, sure. File EBCFA, Reading Public Schools face coverings. Reading Public Schools District is committed to providing a safe
Move
environment.
to waive the reading?
Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, so the motion on the table right now is move to waive the reading. There's no discussion on that necessarily. All in favor of waiving the reading? We have a 6-0 vote on that. Okay, so now process-wise, as we go through this, I can find my mouse again. Okay, there it is. There we go. So we have 3 versions of the policy in the packet. The first version is the version that is currently in effect. And for those of you that weren't here earlier, obviously different people are doing different things. I'm wearing my mask because the policy is currently in effect. And it's a reminder as I was looking through that, that it is. We all got comfortable over the summer with the DSE relaxing guidance, but we had not yet relaxed the policy. That's kind of an overstep on our parts to a degree, but it is what it is right now. So the packet had the existing policy. It has a red line version of the new policy that MASC provided. And this red line does not have any updates from any members of the school committee as it stands right now. And so the conversation tonight will first start with any updates the committee wants to make. We purposely connected to the projector so that we can make them and all can see them. In the past, we've had challenges where we tried to make adjustments and it didn't really work very well verbally. This red line version is so we can see the differences from old to new. We will probably start making updates on the clean version of this so we can start seeing those updates in a red line version as well. So that's the process there. Now, if I can only find my mouse over there, we'd be in good shape. There we go. Okay. Does anybody wish to start with this process, or questions or comments?
Just a clarification, so we're working off of this version, we're not working off of the new?
We'll work off the clean one, but I wanted to make sure everybody saw the red line one first.
Okay.
So I'll open up the clean one too, so we can work off that.
Which is the one titled New Mask.
Which is the one titled new mask, yes. No pun intended. So this is the new policy from MASC. For those of you that aren't aware of what MASC stands for, it's the Massachusetts Association of School Committees. It is a group that helps us, but does not necessarily mandate anything for us. It just helps us to look through things and tries to come up with relative standards. Each district is allowed, obviously, because we're locally bound, to make any updates or adjustments we want to the policies as we go through it. So we'll now start with this policy as an editing point. And I'm looking around. Anybody want to start? Sean?
So I think the model policy from MASC is a reasonable place to start the school year, given kind of the current transmission rates and given that, the majority of our, a significant portion of our school population is still unable to be vaccinated. I think this is a reasonable place to start. I think what I'd like to see us do, and we could capture this in the policy or we could just sort of commit to it publicly, is to set a date for ourselves to review whether we still feel that this policy is appropriate for the conditions on the ground and the conditions that we're facing at any point in time. I put a lot of thought into the concept of modifying this policy with sort of specific metrics that we would look at, where you'd say, under these circumstances, the masking requirement would be waived. I ultimately got uncomfortable with that for a couple of reasons. One is, we talked in our retreat the week before last about this concept of equity and our obligation to serve all students. With the state taking away from us the option to provide any kind of virtual classroom, I think about families with medically fragile children or with immunocompromised folks at home, and I worry about the ability for those families to be able to make the proper and safe choice for their own kids and their own families if we don't sort of employ some of the layers of protection that we have available to us. And so for those reasons, I think initially starting the school year with this policy largely as written is probably the prudent course.
Okay.
So I would agree with that. Similar like we did with when we talked about going to hybrid, we said we would meet if things changed, and so I look at this the same way, that in putting something in the policy that says that we would maybe what you were trying to say, listen to the experts in terms and the people that are giving us guidance to do this tonight on some time set as to whether we should continue or reevaluate or do it that way. So I don't know whether we can put that in the policy, but I think it's a good idea, if it's not in the policy, to have something out there that says that, we're going to continually reevaluate this as the school year goes on.
Okay. Sarah?
I think just echoing what Chuck and Sean have already said, I think that this is a good starting point. I would encourage us to follow data in terms of both guiding us to develop the policy a little bit further, using data, and following public health bodies and what their recommendations are. So I have a couple of suggestions of amendments when we get there related to that. I agree that I think we should have a group, maybe a group that meets regularly, whatever that cadence we determine is, including ourselves and then some experts that can help guide us of whether it's appropriate to either step up or back or whatever it is in terms of where we land.
Okay. Do you have anything?
My hope for this policy would have been to have a metrics in it, so we can identify how we're voting, identify what different levels of criterion we're going to look at, and what compromises or what is involved with our decision making. And we obviously are going to have to regularly visit this, but my hope is that, with some type of metrics, and I'm still waiting for someone to come up with it, some type of metrics that we can take a lot of the guessing out of it. I want, our responsibility is the safety and education of kids, right? They need to be in school this year, right? So how do you allow kids to come to school and be the safest that they can be and have the best educational experience that they can have, right? And we know there's so much information out there. There's so much conflicting information. It's overwhelming to even know where to turn and to find that information. So how do we create an environment that these kids can learn in and be the most engaged in and be the safest in, right? And I'm kind of hoping that it may not happen immediately, but maybe down the road where we can come up with some guiding metrics that can help us. It may not work, right? But at least we can start off with something to kind of see where we're going, because the goal is to be in school this year, right? We need to be in school this year and not be home. So there's a lot of balancing and there's a lot of compromising that people are going to have to make along the way. But the goal is to keep our community in brick and mortar and not virtual. Not that we have that option at the moment.
Okay. You have anything?
So I just want to acknowledge that it's super frustrating that we're having this conversation. It's super frustrating and angering, frankly, that we're back here. I think all of us in June were hopeful that masks would be a non-issue this fall, but none of us predicted the Delta variant and where it was going to go and how it was going to rage. And frankly, not everyone who's eligible to get vaccinated got vaccinated. So here we are. I agree with what everyone has been saying, including Carla, that our priority is to keep kids safe and to keep kids in school. And right now, the state is not even allowing remote school as an option. So we have to do everything within our power to make sure the kids are present in our school buildings. And I know we're not diving into this tonight, but part of the guidance that's come out is that kids who are mutually masked and, 3 feet apart won't have to quarantine. So the masking is not just about preventing the spread, but it's also about, keeping kids present in school, because we don't want kids home, stuck in quarantine, not being able to access school. I also want to acknowledge that there are students in our district for whom masks create difficulty in the school day. We have students who are hard of hearing, and having people around them wearing masks makes that even harder. We have students working on speech and language. How can you hear a kid articulate when they're behind a mask? We have students who are working on learning social cues. How can you really capture that when kids are behind masks? So I do want to acknowledge that I completely get that piece of it, but I feel like we have to make a decision that even trumps all of that, because at the end of the day, we want the kids in school. And we know that they made it work, for better or worse, wearing masks last year. So I agree. I hope this is something we can come back to often as things change, particularly as the vaccination numbers go up in our community, and particularly as school starts and we see how things unfold in our classrooms. But for now, I think it's the only option.
Okay, so just to add to some of that, you all hit on key points, right? The one that the public needs to understand and make sure they understand is that we have no option but in school this year. That's the number one bottom line. That is the only option we have. So we have to do what we can to make sure that kids can stay in school. And most of you have hit on that. And so this is one of those tools to make sure that's the case. I know there's difference of opinion about whether masks work or not, and we may hear some of that tonight, which is fine, and we will respect all of that. But it's one of many tools that's available to us. And it's kind of the concoction of tools available to us, distancing, masks, testing, etc., that as a collective enables the most kids to stay in school. With that said, I have concerns about the policy as it's written. I have concerns about the never-ending open-endedness of it. And I'd really like to figure out if we can work through something into that. I understand Sean's concern about we don't necessarily know what we're going to face. We're hearing in the last couple of days, Lambda's now here, right? So we jumped right past Delta and Lambda's coming. But to a degree, we could say that that could be similar to any new flu variant that's coming about as well. So we have to be cautious about this, that we're not in this never-ending state of masking, and find the right balance. On the same side of that, no single child going into an ICU should be acceptable, or having worse should be acceptable either. And as many of you pointed out, our K through 6, pre-K through 6, can't possibly get a vaccine right now if they wanted to. That might change within a month or two, we'll see, but as it stands, they can't. There was a memo included in the packet that included some data points as well that might be beneficial to just quickly look at as a group. If I can get it to open. And that memo includes some key data points that might help us launch off on things. Before I go there, I want to acknowledge what Aaron was referring to as well. And equity is important in terms of keeping our kids in school, but equity is important in terms of our ability, our kids to learn as well. And there are significant populations, and I would even say that we might not even stop at those with disabilities necessarily. We might start talking about things like if I'm teaching reading, or if I'm teaching my letters, phonemic awareness, phonics, how my mouth moves is important in understanding those things. So is there a time that we want to specifically say when you're teaching ELA blocks and you're doing mouth movements that the teacher can unmask? And those are important. A B versus a D, your mouth physically looks different. And that's probably one of the biggest letters that's difficult for kids to learn. And one of the most effective ways to do so is how does your mouth look? And so those kind of things should come into play as part of this conversation as well. And that might be, I see Sarah nodding, might be one of the things that's an edit that people would like to put out there. In addition to the cues, Aaron, that you referred to, maybe we have other options with, and we did use it last year with our special education teachers with face shields or things like that, so you can still see the lips, you can still see the face. And clear masks, I believe we have, in our district, we still have some that provide some clear mask areas. I think we still have that. I know I heard the other day we have 2 years worth of PPE in the district, so we can last for a while. I don't know how much of that is clear mask, but that's a portion. So with that said, the memo in particular refers to some of the key guidance, and people saw it in the packet already. But some of the key points that refer to us that are reference points for us from a data perspective. Aaron referred to some of the vaccination data, and as we look at it, it's kind of hard to see on the screen right now. But within Reading, and we included Boston because we do have students for Reading Public Schools that are in Boston. Within Reading, we have some pretty decent numbers. If you look at the individuals with at least one dose, and you assume that by the school year they're going to have that second dose, relatively safe assumption since most of it's 4 weeks apart, 3 or 4 weeks apart, you're in a pretty good category list from that 12 to 19-year-old, which is our 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th grade levels. Obviously better at the junior and senior level as necessary. But what I also find interesting is that our quote-unquote at-risk population within Reading, these numbers are like 99%, right? So that's an important thing to consider as well. The at-risk population in Reading is about 99% vaccinated. Doesn't mean they can't get it, because we know from the breakthrough that people can still get it. And we also know that most of the deaths that are happening from breakthrough are in that category of 75 plus. So that's a point of note for information. And we had, thanks to Mary, we have a few more pieces of information for our students at our schools when it comes to the vaccination rates. In our high school level, we have 78%, if I can read that properly from this side, with at least one. So again, by the time school starts, hopefully that'll be 78% of our high school students are vaccinated. Our 7th and 8th graders were at 75%, which is okay, but our middle school is 6th through 8th. So it puts our principals in a very bad operational state to say 2 of our grades don't have to mask while 1 grade does, and making sure that you do that. That's kind of an unfair place for our principals to be, in my opinion. But then you look at our 6th grade and we're looking at 8.5%. Again, because many of them aren't even eligible yet. And of course, our pre-K through 5th, none of them are even eligible, so none of them are vaccinated. Key data points. In terms of other things, this is updated as of last Thursday. We now have the incident rate up to 7.5. It was 6.5 the previous Thursday. Before that, it was almost 0. So we see this kind of growth that's going up that is obviously concerning with where we are from a school opening perspective, and that is graphed out shortly as well. As of last Thursday, we were at 29 total active cases in Reading. Before that was 25, so again, we're seeing growth. Going the wrong direction, not the right direction. And as you can see it from time series perspective, back when we opened schools back in April, which is why I put April as the starting point, we were way up there, but all our kids were masked. When we came to summer, we were way down here. Unfortunately, we're going the wrong direction. And that's an important point for us to understand as well. We're going the wrong direction. And this particular chart is just our school-age kids, assuming pre-K is the youngest age. We're, again, very similarly going the wrong direction appropriately. This is a statewide number because we don't have the grain for Reading at this number. But data helps us understand what we're trying to do. Staff information is old, and we have a new survey out there that we're trying to get more information from our staff perspective. We do know that about 59% of our staff comes from 6 towns. So that leaves 40% of our staff in the 1s and 2% for various different towns. One person can bring it in, and that's a challenge we have to figure out, but that's a point of note. And then, as mentioned, we have no remote schooling option. So that's kind of the background for today. Sarah, I'm going to turn to you because you said you had a couple of edits that you wanted to discuss.
Do you want to take them one at a time, or you just want me to tell you what they are?
We'll take them one at a time, and we'll take them as amendments, okay? So that we can have a relatively clean policy by the end of today that we as a committee are agreeing in going into Thursday. Things may change going into Thursday because just for the committee note, so the community knows, we expect to hear more from the Board of Health on Thursday after their meeting as well. When it comes to where Reading is in particular, we have received memos from the Board of Health chair, and we've received information from the interim director of health, as Dr. Milichewski mentioned, basically recounting, the recommendations that we already know so far. They'll meet on Thursday to see if there's anything else that Reading is going to do. Is that a fair characterization, Tom?
It is.
Tom? Okay. All right. So Sarah, let's start with you and work our way through it.
And actually, where your cursor is I can make, I have a suggested amendment to those bullets down there. So the third bullet, during physical education classes, I'd like us to specify outdoor physical education classes. Indoors, that we should have masks on, according to CDC guidelines. If we're doing physical activities indoors, we should be wearing masks.
So is that an acceptable amendment for you right there, outdoor physical education classes?
Yeah.
Okay. Additionally, face masks and face coverings will not be required when appropriate social distancing is enforced. Outdoor physical education classes, okay? So that's a motion on the table. Is there a second for that motion?
Second.
Mr. Robinson seconds. Any discussion on that motion? Okay, so we will do a hand vote on this as well. All in favor of the change to outdoor physical education classes, raise your hand. And we have a 6-0 vote, so that change is accepted. Okay. Sarah, what's your next one?
The next one, I think a couple people have alluded to as well, and I'm open to how we handle this one, but I would like us to decide if we want to make specific exclusions in this policy, or if they're covered under this kind of exceptions to this policy kind of sentences. So, for example, students doing speech, or they receive lips, or to your point in kindergarten or first grade when you're doing the sounds of doing phonemic awareness classes and phonics, that there are situations where it is more appropriate and in the best interest of students, as can be done safely for maybe the adult and student to not have a mask on. So do we want to call those out specifically? Do we feel like they're covered in the exceptions to this policy under certain circumstances kind of clause?
Who had hands up
Aaron.
first? Aaron.
So I don't think we want to get into taking off masks for those situations. I would propose, depending on the situation we're talking about, but, a student can wear a clear mask to participate in speech. A teacher could wear a face shield, or a speech pathologist could wear a face shield. So I would still want the protection in place, but I think we have to talk about what else could provide that other than, something that completely blocks and muffles the mouth. So I think it would depend on the situation, and I'm not quite sure how we word that, but.
Okay. Sean, you had your hand next?
Yeah, so I think that the next paragraph, which talks about exceptions to the policy and includes face shields or physical barriers as an alternative in some instances, allows for that. But I do think it makes sense probably for us to capture in the list of sub-bullets there something along the lines of staff members who are providing instruction where the ability to see the face is critical to successfully delivering the instruction. Something that's a little clunky, but something along those lines that explicitly adds that as one of the exceptions. Because most of these are really referring to sort of student exceptions versus what we're expecting of staff.
And that was a key point I wanted to raise too, is this policy affects our students, it affects all of our staff. Technically, it affects all of you sitting out there right now too. Anytime anybody goes into a building, that goes into effect. So whether they're there for after school activities, whether renting a facility for something else, it affects everything. And so we need to make sure that's clear for people as well, that that's part of the process. So in this regard, Sean, do you want to, or Sarah, do you want to figure out where you want to put that? Are you listing it in this portion of the section here, such as, or are you thinking we want to create some bullets appropriately? Similar to the previous section where there's bullets that give exclusions.
I was going to literally just add them to the existing list of bullets right there.
This right here?
Yeah, because so if you read that phrasing before that list of bullets, face masks or face coverings will not be required when appropriate social distancing is enforced, and then you've got a number of circumstances in which that's sort of the expectation. So one other circumstance in which that could be the expectation is when a staff member is providing instruction that requires the ability to see the staff member's face. Now, what this will do, if you read it all sort of together, is what we're essentially saying is the face mask or face covering may not be required, but the staff member needs to maintain social distancing, and then because this is an exception to the policy, it must be approved by the building principal in consultation with the school nurse or local board of health. So what that would mean, as I read it, would be staff members who are helping students with speech, or kindergarten teachers who are teaching, phonemic awareness or whatever that might be, during the time that they're doing that type of instruction, would have already approved with the building principal in consultation with the school nurse the ability to use a face shield, for instance, in that circumstance instead of a mask. That's how I would read sort of all this together if we included that as one of the potential exceptions.
Okay, so before we draft that, Chuck, did you want to clarify, or you have?
Well, I just want to, so if you scroll up on the policy, it talks about excuse from wearing masks. Keep going. There you go. Yeah, I'm sorry. The individual. So I'm wondering why we have that section and then the bottom section. Should we just have one section that kind of captures it all?
So one section, this section is a complete exclusion from wearing masks. The second section is in situations you can be excluded from wearing the mask.
Well, there may be a situation where a student may have to have a complete exception, right?
There may be, and so the question would be, is there anything that we're talking about now with regards to instruction that leaves a student to be completely excluded, or for that matter, this is an individual, so it's not student specific, teacher from being.
Well, but we want it to be individual because it's for everybody, it's not just for students. So.
Well, that's my point, is it covers teachers too, so an individual. So this exclusion list is for things that basically mean if they wear it, they'll be in severe distress, right? From a physical perspective, severe distress, trouble breathing, unconscious, incapacitated, and cannot remove the mask or face covering without assistance. This last one's a little fuzzier in that regard, because some of our students might fit that category, of not being able to remove something. But I think that's more of a explicit list as opposed to what Sean's discussing and Sarah's discussing right now is a specific situation, not they're completely excluded during the 7 hours of the day, but in that 30 minutes of a block of time where phonemic awareness is doing, or speech is being taught, or something where the actual physical expression is necessary, that's the time period that they're excluded from having to wear a mask.
So then, what about the situation where the masks provide their emotional distress? I mean, they're not just gonna have that for a
So
time period. That should be up there then.
So we can talk about that there. I'll take that as a secondary after we finish with Sean's, right? I think it's somewhat covered in the medical behavior or other challenge section, but let's go back to Sean's and try and wordsmith that one. So, Dr. Olszewski.
I really appreciate the sentiment around thinking about that. It is extremely difficult in certain circumstances to access learning with sort of seeing, having a face covered. But I think it gets difficult to figure out sort of what's the line that we would draw there. Let me give a few examples. So I've heard from a few foreign language teachers or world language teachers that this is extremely difficult to sort of learn a language when you're not able to sort of see a teacher moving their lips and their face. So that would then potentially be their teacher's full day, right? I also think on the student end, if you have an English learner, say a level 1 English learner, who is, literally picks up cues from seeing sort of mouth movement as well, it would be very difficult for them to access, sort of learning and language acquisition skills without sort of seeing, lips and face. So I just think having sort of that exception, it makes the line very difficult on what do we say, are those exceptions? Because it could be ideally a student's full day. So I go back to the other point is allowing sort of the face shield might be a way to think about that, where we give some more flexibility without having to sort of draw that line that may be very difficult to draw and maybe open to a lot of interpretation. And I'm sure there'd be a lot of different viewpoints. So I just think that the difficulty in operationalizing that, I think, would be a challenge.
So your comment somewhat goes along with Erin's, what she was raising is the taking it off altogether versus providing something alternative.
Exactly.
And I think we can wordsmith that somewhere into one of these.
But then we get into somewhere, I'm sorry to just jump, somewhere in the policy where we define what is an appropriate mask. That's not in here anywhere.
No, it's not. It says, you're covering your nose and mouth. I think that's the essence of it right now, but you're right in that regard. So Carla and Erin, we'll start with Carla and then come back over here.
If we are going to have a situation like Tom was talking about, can we incorporate our testing into that somehow? If there's a teacher who knows that they're going to be, you have a speech and language pathologist, and that they're going to be more effective if the students can see them, maybe they need to be tested every day, because we know that they're going to be taking their masks on and off, if we have that option available to us.
That's a question we can follow up with Colby from a legal perspective, whether we can mandate that. I don't know if we can mandate or not. It's a good question. Tom, do you know off the top of your head?
I don't.
Yeah. I'm going to put that into an open questions at the bottom, just so we have it and we don't lose it.
It would be on the premise if they're going to be taking their mask off. If they don't want to be tested, they won't be taking their mask off.
So just so we have it, we don't lose it, I'll put it up there. So going back to where we were and hearing the feedback, is there, actually, Erin, you were next.
So, a couple things, but to Tom, if we go with say that certain staff can wear face shields, that's something the district will provide, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So I feel like there are going to be situations we're not possibly going to think of that educators are going to think of. But I think there has to be situations where, maybe our forage language teachers wear face shields instead of masks. Maybe our speech pathologists wear face shields instead of masks. We're not going to be able to cover them all. So maybe the language needs to be about situations and then working it out with, the building principal, that sort of thing, that it's worked out on a building level in terms of how the policy is written. But I think it's okay to acknowledge that we want to try and accommodate these situations as much as we can while also maintaining safety for our staff and our students.
We can do some sort of IE list with the.
Yeah, we could provide some examples, but I'm sure there are things we're not going to think of because this isn't, we're not doing this job every day. So I think face shields would probably be the best alternative if we want something clear. I know I hear a lot like clear masks, like just fog up. So I don't know that like clear masks is the way to go, but face shields might be better. Students can certainly wear clear masks like for a brief period, but I think for somebody wearing it all day, I don't think the clear mask is the way to go.
Going there, and I think going with where Sean was going to go as well, what if we take the face shields portion of this sentence out and we move it down to the next paragraph and then we start an IE list or something else like that? That provides this case. The other thing that this portion has is physical barriers. And last year we had many cases where we had the plexiglass in between, especially in the cases when special education testing was happening or something else along those lines. So it's not a perfect solution in any way, shape, or form, because we all know the virus kind of travels, but it's better than nothing, right? And so is there, Sean, I'm looking to you because you started with it motion, Sarah's idea, the two of you, is that something we think we can work with here?
Yes, I think so. I think we need to be careful with how we word it, that's not, face shields certainly are not as effective as a mask. So if language teachers, for example, are going to wear it, we should put some like kind of guardrails around that we're not just replacing all the masks with face shields in specific staff or situations, that it's situational. And then I think we also need to look at the student mask thing. If a student is receiving a speech, you need to be able to see their articulation as well. So they should be wearing a face shield, potentially, or no mask, whichever one we're comfortable with. But I would guess we shouldn't expect families to provide a face shield, or do we? We should be clear about that.
Okay, so let's start with this portion then. Let's start with taking the face shields and down a sentence and working our way through from there.
So, I actually want to make a slightly different suggestion, which I think goes in the same direction as you were suggesting.
Okay.
But what we do in this paragraph, or what the model policy does in this paragraph, is says you've got certain circumstances when we might make exceptions to the policy. They have to be approved by the building principal in consultation with the nurse and board of health. In those instances, when those exceptions are made, we may implement face shields or physical barriers as an alternative, because we've relieved that student of the obligation to be masked in that, under that set of circumstances. We could just add to this paragraph, right, where your cursor is. I'm going to just sort of think out loud here, so this is going to be clunky, but additionally, exceptions may be made for staff when instructional objectives are supported by the removal of the mask or something along those lines. That's probably a little bit too broad. We can work on that. And then I would add right here, such exceptions.
Hold on.
Yeah, sure. I would add here, such exceptions must be approved by, and here I would actually suggest that we think about this as a central office approval rather than a building principal, only so that we have consistency in the way that this is done across the district. I think the student exceptions are appropriate to happen at the building level where the staff know the student well, so that makes sense to me. But when we're talking about staff level exceptions, let's do the same thing for foreign language teachers across the district. Let's do the same thing for speech and language pathologists across the district. So what my suggestion here would be such exceptions must be approved by, and Tom, I'll look to you, but, this maybe feels like an assistant superintendent for learning and teaching kind of role. That works.
And special education.
Sure, yeah, fair, right, yeah. By an assistant superintendent in consultation with the school nurse or local board of health. We can just echo that phrasing.
I'm going to say director of nurses or local board of health.
Right.
I would leave the local board of health out of there.
Yeah, I agree with that as well.
Okay. So this is our amendment as it's written. Is there a second for that amendment?
I'll second.
Seconded by Aaron. Okay. Any conversation on that amendment?
Are we limiting that sentence to staff, or are students included in that as well?
Students, we have,
We have up above, I think, about medical, behavioral, or other challenges. And
Yeah.
then, so either we add another word or phrase to that, or include them in the amended phrase.
okay, so you have preference, and how would you word it? And you're making an amendment to the amendment at this point in time.
The amendment to the amendment.
Well, I mean,
We
let me
haven't
clarify.
voted on these, so there's no amendment to an amendment
Well,
yet.
if you amend the red line, you're amending, or you might be making a friendly amendment, but you're amending Sean's amendment. If you amend anywhere else, it's a separate amendment.
My preference would be to the first sentence, since we just said that we want the building principal to make judgment calls on students. So that would
Okay.
be my preference. So I guess we could leave this one as is, and then
Okay.
amend the first sentence.
All right, so this one sticks to staff. Additionally, exceptions may be made for staff when instructional objectives are supported by the removal of the mask. Such exceptions must be approved by an assistant superintendent in consultation with the director of nurses. Face shields or physical barriers may provide an alternative in some instances. So we're okay with by the removal of the mask because of the face shield line at the end of the paragraph. Okay, any other conversation on this portion of the policy? All right, so we're going to vote on this amendment right now. All in favor of this amendment, raise your hand. All opposed? So we have a 6-0 vote on that amendment. And we'll accept it as part of the document right now. Go ahead.
Can I just, from a process standpoint, if we, between now and Thursday, like to your question about that face shield, if we think about it further and come back, we can send changes to you to the final voted version?
You can, or we can do the same thing that we're doing now on Thursday. Right? I think ideally we're covering as much of the policy tonight as we can. There might be additional feedback. There are open questions as we're documenting at the end. There might be additional feedback we get from the Board of Health that might change things. But ideally we're capturing as much of the information that we want to tonight. Okay, so that's accepted. We're moved on from there. Sarah, back to you because you wanted to make a change to this first sentence.
Yeah, I would say maybe we can echo part of the wording we just used. So maybe, so after exceptions to this policy under certain circumstances, such as for students, when instructional objectives are supported by the removal of the mask or with medical, behavioral, or other challenges. Something like that.
Can't type the word objectives tonight, right? Okay, so exception to this policy under certain circumstances such as for students when instructional objectives are supported by the removal of the mask or with medical behavior or other challenges who are unable to wear masks must be approved by the building principal in consultation with the school nurse or local board of health. So we're saying the decision in this case is school specific, with the idea that building principals know their students best. Okay, any feedback, Tom, that you have on this one potentially?
Yeah, I think I agree with that too, because I think the needs of students are going to be a little bit more specific. I think when we were talking about the other part with staff, it was more things that would be consistent across the building. So potentially foreign language, potentially, kindergarten, phonics blocks, things that may be sort of set in stone and consistent. I think this, depending on the needs of students, I think that's a little bit bigger of a variable, and I think leaving it flexible like that and leaving it up to the principals who know their students the best, the principals and teachers, I think makes most sense.
Okay. Carla?
Could we take out the local board of health?
Well, let's focus. So that's your next one, okay? So that's the next amendment. We can make that soon if you want to. But this one, do you have anything on the red lines right now?
I do.
You do, on the red lines?
I do.
Okay, Sean.
And what I'm about to say, I think would apply to the other one as well, so we can come back to it if folks agree. I wonder if it should just be a little bit stronger than, and I know that I'm recognizing this as my proposed language here. I'm wondering if it should be a little bit stronger than when instructional objectives are supported by. That's a little bit fuzzy. So it could be something along the lines of when necessary to achieve instructional objectives. And again, I would apply that in both. My suggestion would be if we, change it here, that we apply it in both instances.
So when necessary to achieve.
When it's necessary.
When it's necessary. When it's necessary to achieve instructional objectives, the removal of the mask, by the removal of mask.
Yeah, I don't think you actually need to say that, because what you're just defining it as an exception to the policy. So you'd be saying exceptions to the policy under certain circumstances, such as for students when it's necessary to achieve instructional objectives, probably comma, or for students with medical, behavioral, or other challenges.
Yep.
Wouldn't it be it is?
Yeah, we can.
Or just when necessary.
So I think you would strike that, maybe put a comma after objectives. Or for students with, yeah, exactly.
Okay, is that a friendly amendment you'll accept?
Yep.
Sarah?
Yes.
Okay. Still okay over there, Tom?
Yes.
Yep. All right, any further discussion on this redlined portion? The amendment on the table is the red line right now. No further discussion, so we'll vote on the amendment. Those in favor, raise your hand. Those opposed? And again, we have a 6-0 vote, so we'll accept this change as well.
I'm going to make
Okay.
a motion to fix this next one.
Yes, let's do that, then we'll come back to Carla about the Board of Health.
Okay.
All right, so
So the motion would be to replace, exceptions may be made for staff when, and then it should say necessary to achieve instructional objectives.
be consistent there.
Sure. And then strike everything after objectives.
Okay, so now it's saying additionally, exceptions may be made for staff when it is necessary to achieve instructional objectives. Okay, and that section is then such exceptions must be approved. The previous section is again principal. Now we're saying such exceptions here must be approved by the assistant superintendent. Does it make sense to join those those sentences like we did the first one? So that there's no question about what the such exceptions. This is the English major person. I don't know the answer to this question. It's my weakness.
It reads fine the way that it is.
Fine. Okay, so that, I'm gonna remove the period should still be there. All right, so this is the motion on the table now. Additionally, exceptions may be made for staff when it's necessary to achieve instructional objectives, period. Any discussion on this amendment? Okay, seeing none, we'll vote on the amendment now, which will accept this change. All in favor, raise your hand. All opposed? Seeing none, we have a 6-0 vote again. Good. Now, Carla, you wanted to make a change?
I would take out the Board of Health because the assumption is that the school nurse is communicating and talking with the Board of Health.
So you want to change this to, or just end school of nurse right there?
And I would do, can we do a search and see if Board of Health is anywhere else in the policy?
One time.
Okay.
Okay, any discussion on that amendment?
I'll second it.
Okay, we have a second, yeah, I guess we missed a second on the previous one, so hopefully we had it. You made the edits, we'll make you the seconder of the previous one.
There, I'll take it.
Any other discussion on that one? Are we comfortable with the school nurses being responsible? Okay, and Tom was nodding in agreement as well, so that's good. All right, so seeing no further discussion, this amendment, we'll now vote on this amendment. All in favor, raise your hands. All opposed? None? So that amendment is accepted. All right, are there any other changes people wish to make? Erin?
So in the third paragraph, it says face coverings must also be worn outside when social distancing cannot be observed. Can we flesh that out a little bit? Because generally speaking, we're saying face masks do not have to be worn outside, like sort of as a blanket. And I believe the general guidance is that face masks don't have to be worn outside. So I don't know how other people feel about just taking that out.
Chuck?
And I don't know why that's in it, but I'm thinking like, what if there's people sitting in the bleachers? That's probably what I mean, I hear what you're saying, but that's the only instance where I can think where.
So we're gonna ask spectators to wear masks at games? Is that like, that's what you're advising? Or-
That's a logical jump there. Another possibility might be group work outside by students, where they're really close and working through something. We had many times last year where we took students outside. I'm not necessarily opposed to your idea here. I think the outside and the open air viral load factor greatly reduces anyway, but I think that might be another use case. I have a feeling, my view is that it's going to be ridiculously difficult for us to police anybody in the stands anywhere. So it's kind of a no choice, no problem there to a degree. But I think this might more likely apply to, an outside activity that is specifically educational in nature, not physical education.
Yeah, I guess I feel like if a staff or teacher wants to take a class outside to do an activity, then part of the advantage of taking them outside is so that the kids can take their masks off and get fresh air. And I hope that there's lots of outside opportunity for that very reason. So I wouldn't necessarily see that as mandating masks in that instance, because I'm envisioning that students could space themselves out, but
Yeah.
I don't know how other people feel.
Okay, Sean, you had some feedback?
Yeah, just the other use case that comes to mind for me, and I know every school does a little bit differently, but at the elementary schools, pickup in the afternoon. At our elementary school, the kids are typically piled together underneath a relatively small overhang if there's any kind of weather, and so it's just another use case where it's not, it's not to Erin's point, you're not taking the kids outside for the purpose of spreading them out. You're taking the kids outside because they have to be lined up for pickup to work, and they're going to necessarily be sort of crammed into a small space.
Good use case, potentially. I think the question I keep coming back to is enforceability, but Sarah, you have a
Yeah,
question?
I think, the current guidelines from DPH and CDC say specifically about outdoors where you can't social distance, such as you're in a crowded space. So you go to an outdoor concert and you're next to people, you should probably still have your masks on. So if you're in line at pickup, close together with buddy system, you should probably still have your masks on.
Yeah.
But this policy is for staff and students. We can't mandate a policy for residents.
No, the concert is just an example, but so pickup line, if the kids are standing in line waiting for their parents and it's crowded, we should be wearing masks.
The policy applies to renting school buildings, right? So
Outside isn't a building.
It's school property.
it's school property. Whether we can, police it is a whole other conversation, right? But technically it applies to school property. Because theoretically, once they leave, in Sean's case, they walk across the street, they're no longer
They're
in
ripping that
school
mask off.
property, but they may still be, clumped together as best friends walking down the street or something else like that. We have no control over that at that point in time. Sean, Erin, do you want to make the motion officially to strike that, or does the conversation satisfy you for the time being?
I'm just really conflicted about the sentence, so I guess I just wanted to talk it through. As much as possible, I would like outdoors to be a place where our students and staff can take masks off. So there is the caveat when social distancing cannot be observed. I just worry that then it's fuzzy who interprets it how, and then you start finding out, well, at my kid's school, they have to wear it at recess. Well, at my kid's school, they get to take it off at recess. And where's the line?
Actually, I mean, that's another question, right? So this technically doesn't call out recess, but it does say well outside. Physical education and recess are two separate, distinct things necessarily.
I mean, it's almost redundant because we've already said will not be required when appropriate social distancing is enforced. So I don't know that we need the upper sentence because we are covering it. We're already saying you can take it off when appropriate social distancing is enforced.
It is duplicative in that regard. Any other, so are you making the motion?
I will make a motion to strike that sentence from the policy.
I agree.
Second.
Okay, so we have a second. We have an I agree, which I'll take as the first second. And then we have a third. Any further conversation on this topic? Okay, seeing no further conversation, we'll move to the vote on this amendment. Those in favor of this amendment, which would strike this line, you still have the secondary line below it, raise your hand and say aye, or you don't have to say aye, just raise your hand. And those opposed? All right, so it's a 6-0 vote on that change as well. All right, any further changes that anybody would like to make? Sean?
Can I just bring it up for discussion rather than making an amendment
Sure.
first? So I'm thinking about athletics and how last year the Middlesex League had guidelines for athletic competition in particular. It's not captured in this policy, and you know, right now, certain sports that the Middlesex League may decide don't have to be masked would be required to be masked, or you know, I mean, there's all kinds of potential conflicts there. I wonder if we want to include something where, for athletic competition, if there's a Middlesex League policy, we'll allow it to override the other elements of this policy.
Okay.
I'm just bringing it up for discussion. I don't know how people are going to feel about that. But I don't know whether, you know, I don't know, Tom, if you have any idea whether whether the Middlesex League is planning to come up with policies on a sport by sport level as they did last year, what that's going to look like. But I think we should think about the likelihood of those conflicts and what we want to do about it.
I can share quickly that there's been some conversation amongst Middlesex League superintendents about sort of our stance and our approach. I know there's a hope that students outside will have sort of be less restrictions in sort of athletic competitions. I would anticipate a statement sort of being released within the next day or two on that. I'm not sure it'll be a policy. Right now the language looks like it's some sort of guidance or approach or stance on that right now. And I would also add in conversations, Mary Juliana and I have been in conversation with Tom Zaya too, thinking through this. And I think that's someone I would want to have sort of a seat at the table as we discuss whether or not we're having, you know, how we're approaching outdoor things as well. We've been under the interpretation so far that there'd be a little bit more flexibility outside for band performing outside, for athletic, you know, sort of competitions, and also for sort of other learning activities outside. But again, I would want some more insight from Mary at the table for that.
Okay. And just to maybe give everybody a window into my thinking on this, while you know it's probably clear that I'm generally you know, more on the sort of pro-masking end of the spectrum. I think in the instance of athletics, where you've got older students who are, you know, eligible to have been vaccinated, where the participation in athletics is by definition extracurricular and not sort of part of the core academic experience, although I recognize how important it is to many students. I feel a little bit different about, feel it a little bit differently and a little bit more comfortable if the MIA or the Middlesex League or somebody come with a different set of recommendations that allows us to be a little bit more relaxed than we might be during the school day. So that's just my thinking on it.
So just one thought on that is we're already allowing ourselves to not be masked while outside. So if they couldn't get more relaxed than that necessarily. But they might theoretically get more relaxed in the basketball court or the wrestling mat or something else along the swim meet necessarily. Okay. Just want to make sure we're on the same page what you're referring to. All right. Chuck?
You know, to Tom's point, I think we need to wait and we need to hear from those people before we even attempt to put something here.
Yep.
And, you know, that may come after the policy. We may have to change did in the fall too.
Right.
And then the spring sports. I'm sure they'll do the same for this fall.
I would anticipate that we'd have updated guidance by our next meeting on Thursday, so.
Great.
I think you're all hitting on why I suggested we just bring it up for discussion rather than offering an amendment at this point, because I understand and respect that we probably will know more, but I do think it's something for us to consider, given the potential for conflict.
Okay, any other feedback on the policy or updates?
Do we want to, so there's a sentence, I think the last sentence, this policy will remain in place until rescinded by the school committee. Do we want to put some language in there around, you know, how often we're going to revisit it, that we will be revisiting it on a frequent basis as, you know, as data changes, evolves?
So that's the part I wanted to hit on pretty hard, was that section right there too. Because it makes me, everybody here, and I would have been too if I hadn't read this mask policy like 15 times since last meeting, is violating technically the policy. And that's only because we didn't review it. So I think we need to make sure we come back and review it on a regular basis. I do think we want to put some, I'm not saying absolute numbers, but the measurements that we're looking at in here as well. Whether it's vaccination rates, whether it's incident rates, whether it's number of active cases, you know, and I wanted to consider, this is one of the reasons why I asked Dr. Malashevsky about staff locations. I wanted to consider not just our students, but our entire staff, because they're impacted by that decision as well. And that's why we found out that 58% of our staff are covered by 6 towns, right? So maybe we could use those 6 towns as a guidance for it, which is, off the top of my head, Reading, Stoneham, North Andover, North Reading, Wilmington, and one more. Andover, okay. So I think we do want to put something here. And if you want to start, Sarah, we can work with it, or I can start if you want to.
If you have a specific thoughts, or do you want to discuss what kinds of metrics we would want to include there, or a little bit of both?
Sure.
I guess, you know, also keeping in mind that policies live for a while, so, you know, the metric needs to be broad enough that it's, you know, good down the road for other types of situations where you live.
Agreed, and that's one of the, I think that's one of Sean's nervous points about this, from where he started with this conversation to a degree, is, you know, is it a big enough number or a most consistent enough number, you know, that we would see it with another pandemic of sorts. You can't foresee necessarily, but from a health perspective, you are probably going to get a number of case count. You're going to get, you know, a vaccination rate, because people are going to want to go for vaccinations. You're going to get an incident rate of some sort. And, you know, maybe there are other things that you may not get. So like I was thinking about, and part of the reason why the memo includes the MWRA stuff, I was thinking about the RNA rates in the water, right? But that might be more appropriate for this case. It may not be appropriate for all cases. Yeah. So, Erin.
I'm really wary of getting like too bogged down into details with it. I mean, I would rather see broader language, like we're going to review X, you know, quarterly, something like that, because I think back to this time a year ago, and we talked about, oh, if Reading's in the red, we'll go fully remote. Well, by the time Reading was in the red, nobody wanted us to go fully remote. We were trying to push more and more in person. You know, last fall, if one kid from either high school had COVID, one kid, we canceled games. So one kid in the opposing team, one kid in Reading, we canceled the whole game. By the spring, like we were operating at a much different level. I think we just don't know where we're going. I'm really wary of like locking us into something that won't make sense a few months from now.
And that's why I don't think we want to put numbers in here. We don't want to say if the case count gets to 5, or if the incident rate drops to 2.5, or, you know, I don't think we want to put those numbers in there. I agree with you in that regard, but I do think we want to put, these are my view, and I'm just obviously one of 6, right? These are the points of data that we're targeting, we're looking at. If something changes, we'll also put, to your point, we're reviewing this on a quarterly or monthly or every other month basis that we can add to that if we need to. But these are the points of data that we're looking at. And part of the reason why I want to say that is I think it's important that we collectively and we as a community have something to look at and target. And it's not this never-ending black hole of we're in masks. And maybe that's just my perception of it, but we really need something to say, okay, if I can look at these numbers and I can see positive trends in that, I have hope that I'll get out of masks. And I think that hope is a really important thing. It's a really powerful thing that helps drive people in the positive direction. That's where my head is, at least. But I don't want to say if the number gets to 5, or the number is 7.5, or the number is 10. I don't want to do any of that. But if these are the metrics we're looking at, I think it can help. Does that make sense?
It does, and I think I agree with you, but I guess I'm just trying to understand. So you're saying like we will examine these data points without saying we need to see the data at X amount? Like just this is the data we're going to look at?
Something along those lines. And let's start wordsworthing it now and see what it comes out to.
Okay.
Sean?
Yeah, Tom, I think I agree largely with where you're going here, and I think the point is, what we're trying to do here is to not say that this is a set it and forget it type of policy, right? We're not trying to say this is the policy indefinitely, which is sort of how it closes. It's literally how it closes. It's the policy indefinitely. And so something as simple as follow this sentence with something, and again, I'm just going to offer this for discussion right now, not necessarily an amendment. Something as simple as the school committee will regularly receive updates on transmission rates, case counts in schools, we can just define some of the metrics that sort of folks look at, as well as guidance from public health experts or public health authorities. And, that sort of says, this policy will remain in place until rescinded by the school committee, but it's not a set it and forget it. And we are going to leave open the likelihood that we're going to revisit this regularly as some of those things change or the guidance changes from those public health authorities. I do think that that's an important, sort of an important way to differentiate this policy. Chuck made the comment, this would apply to future pandemics and things like that. I actually hope it doesn't. I actually think, we'll sunset this. Well, obviously, I hope there aren't. None of us live through another one of these things, but even more so, I
didn't say pandemic.
Fair. But what I would hope is that we do get to a place where, all of those things, the metrics, the guidance from public health authorities gets us to a place where we can rescind this and it's gone for some period of time, right? And we may, if there's another pandemic or another public health emergency, maybe we have to bring back something similar. But I'm hoping that we're not sort of leaving this as the policy that's in effect forever and we're just sort of softening it over time as things get better around COVID. At some point, this policy is not necessary as we didn't think it was necessary a year and a half ago.
Okay.
We did, through the last year, receive those updates from Mary Juliana and others.
We never came back to this policy.
Right.
We missed that part. So we did receive those updates. It was a regular thing. John would regularly report on, et cetera. But it never came back.
So
and
we
said,
memorialize it.
right. So we're going to memorialize our obligation to do it in what we're talking about here. Carly, you had your hand raised.
So if we don't know what our numbers are, we're saying we're going into school with masks, but we don't know what our numbers are. So how are we ever going to get masks off, right? We're going to go in, and then people's emotions are going to get involved. But if we have numbers and we can say, okay, here's where we started off. These are the things we looked at. This is where we started off. And if the numbers are going to go down, then we should be taking off our masks, right? But we have to understand where we're starting from, right? So we need, as far as I'm concerned, we need identifiable numbers, because why are we as a committee telling our district that you have to wear masks? Why? Listen.
From the advice of our director, nurses.
What numbers are causing us to tell our district to put on masks?
Well, I mean, to a
Right.
degree, the current answer to that question right now is not necessarily an absolute number as much as it is a very scary trend, right? To stop the trend of where we're going. And that trend means our current number is 29 cases in Reading, and we have a 7.5% incident rate, or 7.5 incident rate, yes.
Okay, those are
So
numbers.
those are two numbers of
right?
the current, in the current space.
So let's identify points where we're at when we head into school on the 1st, right? And then we can start gathering our own data, and we can start seeing what our own trends are. Because my fear is, my fear is that we're going to put masks on and we're not going to take them off if the numbers start to go down. Because I think that hesitancy, if the numbers are going down, we can't take our masks off because it's going to spike up again.
So that's part of the point of what we're trying to achieve here,
Right.
is what is that? We may not get to that, I mean, where I think we disagree is what the absolute number is, because I think it's going to be really hard to say what the absolute number is, right?
I don't want an absolute number. I want to know what we're basing this decision on right now.
Well, then we need those people in the room, because we need Mary here to tell us what that number should be. We can't decide that tonight.
But what specific pieces of data are we using? And if we're looking at 5 different pieces, it doesn't mean we have to set a point at each.
Right, so you're agreeing
Yeah.
with where we're generally going, really is what it comes down to. We just need to say, what are we looking at? And then Mary will be here on Thursday. So we will have that additional input from her on Thursday as well. We will have had the Board of Health related feedback coming prior to Thursday as well, so we can tighten it up or do what we need to do. And Erin?
One of these points of reference has to be vaccination numbers.
Okay.
And I think that it's not just case numbers for me, it's the percent of the population that's vaccinated. Because we know that vaccinated people are still spreading it, but the higher number vaccinated, the least likely that the spread is going to happen. So I would like that to be included in whatever we're getting updates on.
So let's start putting the wording in here and work our way through it. The reality is the policy will remain in effect until we rescind it. But let's now add to that, right? And I'll just start, and everybody can edit as we go through. The school committee will regularly, I'm going to say at a minimum bi-monthly for now, which is every 2 months. I'll say every 2 months because bi can be confused. If we want to change it, you can change it, but I'll say right now, because I know where the calendar is and how challenging the calendar is, I'm going to say every 2 months. Receive updates from superintendent, the director of nurses, director of nursing. Is that what it is? It's not is?
Nursing, yep.
And I'm just going to say or, because we're not going to put anybody else on the spot for that. With respect to the following data points that will inform the committee's decision to rescind this policy.
Rescind or modify?
I just ended after decisions, inform the committee's decisions. Because it's not necessarily,
Might not need to rescind.
I'm going to leave it as I is, and then you guys can edit. Rescind or modify is what
Yeah, I like that.
this policy, okay? And we'll put in there, so we can edit, so vaccination rates per grade, leave it at that.
But also staff.
Yes.
Yep. For grade, per school, I'll leave it at that. Students and staff. Okay, case rate in Reading and top 5 staff localities. Incidents rate in Reading, and top 5 staff localities. My typing is bad from far away.
Can I ask a question on
Go ahead.
what defines, what did you use for a definition to make it into the top 5? I mean,
So the numbers that Tom and Michelle pulled together is the absolute of all of our staff, teachers, paras, secretaries, custodial, et cetera, the number of locality with the greatest number, right?
so what's that number? I mean, 5? Is it 10?
So outside of Reading, which is I think 48%, the other 5 were 3%, give or take.
So it was out of 920 was the total amount of staff members. The staff members, it included, full-time staff, also part-time staff and ESY staff as well.
So how many of that 900, how many of them were actually part of those top 5?
58%.
Approximately 60%.
Yeah, about 60% and 60. I almost,
So that's,
just thinking about that further, I almost wouldn't even include those additional towns, because people in Reading aren't just staying in Reading, right? They're going to sports, they're going outside of Reading. And are we going to base a lot of our decisions on, 60% of 920 staff members? I think we should keep it to Reading.
What about county?
What about what?
County? Case rates in Reading and surrounding counties or something like that? To Carla's point, traveling, et cetera, I think looking at, so if you look at the CDC transmission level guidelines, it's county.
To Middlesex.
In Essex, even looking at Essex too.
Middlesex County.
I would keep it to Reading.
Do we want to do that? I mean, part of the reason, most of the top 5 are all in Middlesex anyway, so I'm okay with that if you want to do that.
All we're saying
It
is
makes
this
it
is
a
what
little
we're
bigger.
looking at.
Yep.
That's all we're saying, like that we will consider this data.
consider exactly,
Yeah.
and not change something.
We're not saying that,
Just because of that.
And it's much less of a lift for Tom and Mary to provide us with an update on Reading and Middlesex County than Reading and 5 other towns where they're going to have to go dig all that data out.
It's all there, I've already done it, but yeah, I hear you. Okay, so are there any other data points that we feel are appropriate to include?
I mean, I think cases and transmission inside our schools.
yeah.
Okay,
I don't know if this is an appropriate place for it, but current mitigation strategies in practice in the district, I'm assuming at different points in time, we might have different mitigation strategies in practice. So, are we doing social distancing indoors or are we not? Those things will come into play.
that might be an additional paragraph.
So
Additional
do you need something that would be in
points
lieu
of
of?
information.
So like different-
No, in addition to, so if we're going to review the mask policy, understanding holistically what we're doing to mitigate transmission rates. So we can't make a decision, in my opinion, to remove masks, for instance, if we're not doing any social distancing or we, whatever those other things might be.
So looking at the whole picture.
Looking at the whole picture, exactly.
Can I add in that same vein, mitigation strategies currently in effect and guidance from public health authorities?
Yep.
Yeah.
I think I would lowercase public health authorities, it's sort of generic.
Grouping. Okay. So it reads, the school committee will regularly, every 2 months at a minimum, receive updates from the superintendent or the director of nursing with respect to the following data points that will inform the committee's decision to rescind or modify this policy. Vaccination rate per school, students and staff, case rate in Reading and Middlesex County, incidence rate, I'm going to say, should we say 14-day It's the 14-day incident rate, right? Technically?
There are some 7-day, but yeah.
So it's the 14-day incidence rate is what it is. I think I don't have a number.
How many cases in a given period?
It's,
We can adjust it on Thursday.
yeah, let's adjust it on Thursday,
Yeah.
okay. So, cases and transmission inside Reading Public Schools. All of these, because they're bulleted lists, will follow the period case of the previous one. Even though semicolon might be better. Additional points of information will include mitigation strategies currently in effect and guidance from public health authorities. Okay? Any further discussion on this amendment?
Can I make a suggestion, given that we might, as we learn and evolve, we might want to look at other data? I know we kind of say it a little bit below, but could we say in the intro sentence, receive updates from the superintendent, the director of nursing, with respect to something about, but not limited to the following, or inclusive of the following data points? I don't want to limit us to those specifically.
How's that already? Is that good, Sarah?
Yep,
Okay, I'll take that as a friendly amendment.
thank you.
So this is the amendment, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, 2 or 3 seconds. Chuck?
I just had a question. So in theory, we wouldn't get our first update until October? Is that?
No, we said at a
At a
minimum.
minimum, so if we want to, if we can, so part of the reason, Chuck, I put that is, and we'll hit this at the end of the meeting, we have 3 financial forums in September and October. We have a town meeting that's being scheduled for the end of September. We have all of our back-to-school nights in September as well that are coming up, not all of which that we go to, but that the town and community members will go to. There's just a lot that's going to happen in September. We already have a pretty packed agenda for the 13th of September, and so I'm wanting to give us some flexibility. I don't know if we're actually going to be able to meet another time in September, looking at the rest of the calendar, and that's why I'm trying to give us a little bit of flexibility. Ideally, I'd like to do this monthly as well, if not more regularly, but I want to be realistic about what's possible, considering the challenge that we have calendar-wise. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, but we could schedule a meeting just for this topic.
We could.
So it wouldn't necessarily be this, you know.
That's a fair point, we could. Yep. Do you want to make a motion to amend it
I
to
mean,
everyone?
let's see what we get Thursday night, and then maybe think about it.
Okay. Anything else on this amendment? Okay, seeing none, we have a motion and a second. Those in favor of the motion on the table, which approves the red text to be included in the policy, please raise your hand. All those opposed? And we have a 6-0 vote. Okay, is there any other committee-related feedback on the policy?
There's one more, I think it was actually Chuck, you brought it up. Do we want to define what a face covering is in the policy?
So face covering covers, a face covering that covers the nose and mouth is the short definition. Do we want to add to that?
I feel like, I wasn't involved in this last year, but I feel like maybe it was just building level when there were specific guidelines. It is not a ski mask, it is not a bandana.
Yeah, it said
it
no
is not
gaiters,
a-
no bandanas. Like,
Yeah, I mean, I was getting on an airplane, and anybody had a gaiter, they made them take them off. And gave
Okay.
them-
And gave them a paper mask.
Does anybody have that language available readily, or should we couch that for Thursday?
Can we couch it for Thursday and we can,
Thursday, yeah.
Okay. Okay. All right, any other feedback or thoughts from the committee? Okay, so now is the time where we turn to those of you in the public who might be here to speak specifically to this topic. We will apply public comment policy here in that each individual speaker has 3 minutes. Please state your name and address, and please speak to the lectern if you have feedback or questions. When it comes to that policy, if we can address it, I might address it, Tom might address it, or we might ask somebody else to address it if they can, but we don't necessarily have to. So I just want you to be aware of that as well when you decide to speak, if you decide to speak. With that said, anybody have, who wants to be the first one? Yes, miss. Over there, yes, please. And you already provided us the materials.
Hello?
Hello.
So my name is Jennifer Trino, and I live at 400 Main Street in Reading. I am going to begin by saying that my talk tonight is based on facts and data. I have a folder of information for you to support each of my positions tonight. I'd like to read a direct quote from Dr. Fauci from February 2020. The typical mask you buy in a drugstore is not really effective in keeping out the virus, which is small enough to pass through the material. I'm here tonight because my 16-year-old will be forced to wear a mask for 7+ hours a day again. My son has severe anxiety and language processing issues noted in his IEP evaluation. Wearing a mask will not help this. He tells me he can't understand his teacher. And as an example tonight, the woman on the end of the mask there, I haven't heard one word that she said, and she has a microphone in front of her. He says he can't breathe properly, and the mask makes him dizzy. Last year, he was forced to run in a mask during wrestling practice. And it's really good to know that if he's unconscious, he can take off his mask. This clearly will have a negative impact on his ability to learn. This is so upsetting to me as a mother, and it should be upsetting to everyone. We know so much more this school year. Let's start by talking about how COVID affects children. Nationally, the CDC reports that for the week of July 31st, the rate of hospitalization with COVID for children 15 to 17 was 0.5 per 100,000, which amounts to 250 patients across the country. The CDC acknowledges that not all of these children were in the hospital for COVID. Viral testing at admission is routine, even for patients that have no COVID symptoms. The FDA has revoked the PCR test emergency use authorization, yet they are using this through December. I tried to get the number of children hospitalized for COVID currently in Massachusetts, and the DPH is no longer currently publishing that info as of June 30th. This should raise a red flag for you as it did for me. As we know, children experience very mild symptoms even now with the new variant. What it is very clear now, a year later, is the impact masking has on students. We have heard from the experts who have told us that masks cause physical, mental, and emotional harm to students. The effect of masking will be felt for generations. This is according to Dr. Cody Messender, who is the chief of the Division of Pediatrics of Infectious Disease at Tufts University School of Medicine. He states that most of the hospitalizations in Massachusetts in children are due to mental health issues and not COVID. Dr. Mark McDonald, a California pediatric psychiatrist, stated that masking children is child abuse. He states that due to the mask mandates in schools, he has seen hundreds of children in his practice who are ill from masks, and not a single child has benefited from masks. A study was conducted by the Division of Cardiology at the Veterans Affairs at Palo Alto Healthcare Systems in conjunction with Stanford University that found not only are masks ineffective in preventing COVID, but masks cause adverse psychological, physiological, and adverse health effects. The National COVID-19 School Response Dashboard has found that unmasked students and staff had a lower COVID-19 rates compared to those who were required to be masked, no matter how high their community transmission rate was. Please see the corresponding graph in the packet. The state of Massachusetts is ranked as the second highest in the U.S. in terms of adults vaccinated and has the lowest rate of vaccine hesitancy in the U.S. All teachers have had the opportunity to do so. Please do not mask our children to make vaccinated adults feel safer. When you know better, you do better. Doing better is allowing parents to make the decision about what is right for their child. Doing better is pushing political narratives aside and considering all the information before you. The children have sacrificed enough. Please create a positive learning environment for our children, one in which they feel comfortable. Let them see the smiles. Let them learn the way they should learn. Enough is enough. Please do not impose any mask mandates this school year. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Hi, Julie Ross, 16 Kensington Ave. I just want to thank you all for your thoughtful approach to the policy and the amendments that you made. It just showed a lot of care and concern for all students, and I just want to thank you for that. So that's it.
Are there any other public comments? Yes, miss.
Hi, I'm Cynthia from 20 Briarwood Ave. Our children may end up being amongst the greatest casualties of the COVID pandemic, not because of the virus, but due to the restrictions placed upon them over the last year, which have interrupted mental, social, and emotional development in unprecedented ways. It became clear early on that children and teens are at very low risk from COVID, with a 99.997% survival. Let me say that again, a 99.997 survival. That's even more than the flu. Kids die of the flu more than they die of COVID. Masking, social distancing, and virtual schooling persisted nonetheless, even as experts sounded the alarm about the probable implications, including physical, psychological, and behavioral adverse effects. It's been largely assumed that face masks are safe for kids to wear for long periods, such as during school, but no risk assessment has ever been carried out. But there is much evidence that masking harms both children and adults. Using data of over 25,000 children, 24 health issues were reported that were associated with wearing masks that fell into the categories of physical, psychological, and behavioral issues. They recorded symptoms such as irritability, headaches, difficulty concentrating, being less happy, impaired learning, drowsiness, fatigue, shortness of breath, dizziness, acne, rashes around the mouth, and etc. Dr. Jim Meehan, a preventative medicine specialist, conducted an evidence-based scientific analysis on masks, which shows that not only should healthy people not be wearing masks, but could also be harmed as a result. He compiled 17 ways that masks can cause harm. A few of them. Masks lower oxygen levels in the blood. Masks raises carbon dioxide levels in the blood. Masks trapped exhaled viruses in the mouth or mask, increasing viral or infectious load and increasing disease severity. COVID becomes more dangerous when blood oxygen levels decline. Masks collect and colonize viruses, bacteria, and mold. Masks and stay-at-home orders prevented the development of herd immunity. Some of us have known from the very beginning of this COVID pandemic that children were at exceptionally low risk for hospitalizations and death from this infection. As of right now, there have been roughly 350 deaths from COVID among kids under 18. That's less than the flu. And every single one of them had an underlying comorbidity. If you want to force kids to wear a mask, I want scientific data that proves kids are not harmed by masks, and not from the CDC, because CDC said it, or the FDA said it. I want facts, I want scientific data, because there isn't any. Somebody needs to have the courage to stand up for our kids. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there, yes?
Hi, Rebecca Bailey, 17 Forest Glen Road. I'm speaking into a microphone, and I'd prefer not to because I have an unvaccinated young child at home and I am in an indoor public space. So that leads into my, my comments. I appreciate, as Julie said, the thought and care that you've taken with this policy. I have an elementary school student. She is too young to get a vaccine. So is everyone in her class, so is everyone in her school. And I have been looking at a Reuters article right here that says the number of children hospitalized with COVID-19 in the US hit a record high on Saturday. And it quotes the former president of the American Academy of Pediatrics, who says this is not last year's COVID, this one is worse, and our children are the ones that are going to be affected by it the most. So we can't assume anything from what we knew before. I think the facts on the ground are showing the numbers are up, more kids are in hospitals than ever, according to this Reuters article. So I just appreciate that you're taking all that into account, that you put vaccinations as a factor that you're going to be considering as far as keeping a mask policy in place. And again, I just thank you for considering that all of our elementary students are susceptible to this, our vulnerable population across the board, and I thank you for protecting them.
Any further comments?
Good evening, members of the school committee. My name is Brian Paulson. I reside on John Carver Road. I have 4 kids, grade 7, 5, 2nd, and a 2-year-old at home. Healthy kids should not wear masks. Healthy adults should not wear masks. I come before you this evening to ask you vote to make masks optional for this upcoming school year, leaving it up to the parents to decide what's best for their children. After reading the emails that will be shared tonight, I realize that I may have different views than the majority of the parents in this town. But if I don't stand up for my children now, then who will? This past year and a half has been unimaginable, with so many unforeseen challenges for all. My wife and I have watched our children navigate through it with sadness, anger, and confusion. Our happy-go-lucky 10-year-old went from loving school to sobbing every Sunday, Monday, leading up to her in-person weeks. Every morning I dropped her off at school. She put that mask on, and I saw it fade away. The saving grace through it has been that children are not high risk for severe illness or death from COVID-19. I'm so grateful for that. The Mass Department of Public Health COVID-19 dashboard provides numbers of cases and deaths by age for 2 weeks prior. Data shows that children aged 0 to 19 have a 0% death rate week after week after week. I worry so much about our kids and the long-term social-emotional effects of wearing a mask. There is so much we can't control. Please give us the opportunity to choose for our children what their first day of school will look like in 2021. I saw the sense of celebration and relief this spring when mask mandates were lifted for sports. We got to see our kids' softball and baseball teams smiling on the field and at bat for the first time. We got to see smiling faces at our kids' swim meets this past weekend at a big championship meet as we finished off a real-life, actual swim season. Our kids have a sense of normalcy. They feel like they've made it through the hard stuff, and for many, the hardest they've had to deal with so far. Now to take a step backward and tell them they have to wear a mask for a back-to-school season that is already filled with so much anxiety is just too much. We need to make our kids feel safe at school, and forcing them to wear a mask is doing the opposite. It's time to start making calm, rational decisions for our children based on data, not fear. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments?
Thank you. Chris Haley, 71 Tennyson Road. I'm going to just be reading something that my wife put together. She works at Children's Hospital. I do not. So this is written by her and her current experience with that. I'm not here tonight to give my stance on whether children and staff at our school should be mandated to wear masks. I'll leave that decision to you all. However, what I would like to bring attention to is the type of mask that should be worn. Each day when I enter Boston Children's Hospital, where I work, I'm required to remove my mask from home and replace it with a clean medical grade mask, not a surgical grade mask, because there's a difference. Each time I've entered Winchester Hospital, Leahy Hospital, or Mass General as a patient, Whether it be for an appointment or a visit, I'm required to replace my mask from home with a hospital-provided medical-grade mask. Why is that? Because masks worn in from the outside are made from all types of material that may not be suitable to prevent the aerosol from exiting the mask. Furthermore, where have you worn your mask you are currently wearing? Was it in the bottom of your bag, on the floor in your car? When's the last time you washed it? I can guess that most people in this room or folks at home are not wearing a clean mask. Yes, I fully understand there would be a significant cost associated with this new practice. However, if we're going to mandate masks, perhaps we should be wearing masks that properly protect our most vulnerable population. And I'll just share from my own personal experience with my youngest daughter. She was in speech therapy and may have to end up going back to that as well. And I mean, I'm not saying that it's because of teachers and all this stuff wearing masks that her, all of that is slowed, but I mean, you know, that's just my experience with it as well. I'll just close with, I'm happy that our kids will be going back, and we weren't given a false decision like it was done last year when the survey came out and was one-sided, and then it went the complete opposite direction. So I'm happy about that, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any further comments?
Justin Perry, 47 Whittier Road. I want to start off by saying it's heartbreaking to hear about your daughter. I'm so sorry. I want to also say, Rebecca, you're well within your rights to wear your mask. That's the whole point of this. It's been a pleasure to see how the cake's baked tonight. However, I think that this policy is absolutely not ready to be voted on, and it poses significant liability to the school committee, and that's why I'm here tonight. Just a couple things. Last year, you know, a lot of people talk about how we're in a different place, and we are. Last year, we were dealing with a fluid situation, and this year, we're dealing with a fluid situation. And I don't think that anybody can underscore how difficult it must be to be in your position. You're an elected official, and you've got a lot of weight, and to Carla's point, there's a lot of competing information out there, right? It can be overwhelming. I understand that. However, you know, you're thrust into this situation where you're needing to make policy. It's very important to take a step back and understand something. The vaccines that are a KPI may well be the reason for these variants. They may well not be. We don't know. The vaccines that you're talking about as a KPI here are authorized under emergency use. There's a reason why the FDA hasn't approved them. The CDC has issued guidance. There's a difference between guidance and policy. You're making policy tonight. And you know what policy is? It's a decision that's enforceable. You had an executive session before this meeting to talk about litigation against the school committee. There is a 0.03% chance that a child will die from COVID. There is a hell of a lot bigger chance that you will be held individually liable by somebody in this community whose child has a demonstrable and quantitative behavioral, psychological, developmental issue as a result of your policy. You are victims of an imperfect system. We are all victims of an imperfect system. We understand that. But Aaron, when you sit there and you talk about the idea of understanding that it can be difficult for a child to be able to learn how to speak and certain things like that with a mask on, you're absolutely right, and it's evident that you care. It really is. But what you might not know is that there are actual studies that I can provide you that actually talk about that in great detail, that are measurable. But we're not referencing studies tonight. Carla asked a question to you, Tom, and to you, Chuck. What metrics are we here for? This policy is rooted in metrics that we're not talking about. We don't want to get too specific. We don't want to get too general. The metrics themselves are in question, to the point about the PCR test, to the point about when that dip happened, that's when the PCR tests were calibrated slightly differently. The fact of the matter is that, Tom, you don't want this to go on forever. Nobody does, right? I have some very uncomfortable news. COVID is never going away. ever. The vaccines are not meant as a prophylactic. They are meant to lower the impact of the virus. The variants that come up, the reasons why they are breakthrough cases is because the way that their body is reacting, there's always going to be a COVID issue. So let's talk about the masks, okay? Because I'm not going to be somebody that's going to lay this on your lap and say, oh, you might get sued, there's this and that. I want to help you make a solution, and here's the solution. I'm going to tell you right now. Nobody in this town will sue you for the following. The goal here is to solve the problem, and the problem is keeping people safe, right, Tom? We sat down 2 weeks ago and I told you about all this stuff. You don't seem very much more in tune with what we were talking about, and you haven't followed up with me on any of the information I was willing to provide. I wanted to prevent this. So, we want to keep kids safe. An N95 mask or better, medical grade mask, should be provided by the town to any student or any teacher that wants it to. A vaccine should be provided to anybody that wants to be vaccinated. We have Hipaa laws, we have privacy laws. They have to be honored, or we have to make a policy that says we're not honoring them. If you give everybody, student, teacher, faculty, whoever, the ability to feel safe and be safe from the transmission of a virus, then it doesn't matter what anybody else is wearing, because the mask is safe. And if it isn't safe, then why are we all wearing masks? So you're going to craft a policy whereby the KPIs are going to be vaccination rate, incident rates, all of these things which are logical. They're not illogical, they're logical, but we're dealing with an imperfect system, right? So we're dealing with vaccines that don't prevent the spread, and we're dealing with variants that are coming as a result of who knows what. I have an idea, but I'll keep that to myself. And then the last thing is we're dealing with PPE that may or may not be effective at stopping the spread. What are we talking about? Before you sit down and vote on this on Thursday, you better have a stack of medical information by impartial people specifically disproving what that lady says in her folder, or else this meeting that's on video has you liable individually. And the people that you're signing up for, the nurses, they should be here because you're signing them up for a legal responsibility. That's not fair to them. You don't know that you're doing that. You're guilty of trusting people that you should trust. I don't blame you. You're good people. But you can't, it's not good enough now. You can't be sitting here. I sat here, I get 3 minutes to talk. We're talking 45 minutes. It's like we're writing a term paper here, okay? We're talking about individual line items and language that makes no sense because there is no North Star. Not quantifiable, troubling trend, no vaccines, masks, no vax, face guards, whatever. And by the way, if you have this, and this, you're immune. You don't have to go with this plan. Yet, Tom, you say one is too many. One case is too many. So why do we have exceptions? Because we need exceptions. So what are we saying? We can't contradict ourselves in 5 minutes of the other person saying it and not realize that we're contradicting ourselves. So I'm here as your friend. Trust in this community. Do not be the ones holding the bag. There's a reason why everybody above you has issued guidance, and you are issuing a policy that has to be enforced. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. Any further questions or comments from the public? Yes.
Hi, Laura Noonan, Pennsylvania Avenue. I came here tonight to make sure that there was a voice for children with disabilities who were in, like people had said, were in speech therapy or were hard of hearing. And I almost didn't come to the podium because we covered that and we put language in, and I almost went home. But I sat here and I realized that you aren't voting on this tonight, and there's going to be another discussion on Thursday. So I just wanted to, I was here, I might as well say, thank you for covering that, for putting that language in. It is extremely important. There are children who are in speech therapy, and there are children that are pre-verbal, meaning that they are at rise and they are not considered nonverbal because there is hope that they will speak and they are not making words yet. And when they have a face covering on, their therapist cannot see the lip movement, they cannot do touch prompts, and there is a whole year under those children's belts of virtually, like essentially not getting speech therapy at all because they weren't adequately being serviced. So it is extremely important that that was covered. Thank you so much for putting it in, and please don't take it out on Thursday. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments from the public on the mask policy, the face covering policy? Okay, seeing none, we will move on to the next and...
Vote to accept the first reading.
Oh yes, thank you, Sean. Technicality-wise, we have to vote to accept the first reading, which has now been completed. Any further comments or questions from the committee on this policy as drafted before we do that vote? Okay, so by hand vote, we will do that, and I will ask everybody in favor of the policy, in favor of the first reading, let me be clear, in favor of the first reading to raise their hands. And we have a 6-0. Anybody opposed? No. So 6-0 in favor of the first reading of the policy. All right. So now we will move on to the last item on the agenda, and that item is the liaison for the Reading Coalition. So a little bit of background here for the committee, and it was in the memo as well, but just so everybody's on the same page. Back when we were determining what we needed to appoint Dr. Milashevsky to, I reached out to Erica McNamara, who's the lead of the Reading Coalition of Prevention and Support, to see if we needed to officially appoint him to the advisory board for the Reading Coalition. And she said no. So Tom and Mr. Tracy, who's the principal here at the high school, are on that advisory board. I think it's codified in it appropriately. But she did say that they do not have a liaison from the school committee and they would like one. So I included in the memo the meeting plan that she has given, and you also saw the correspondence that included the last agenda. I wanted to see if anybody on the committee had any particular interest in being the liaison before assigning appropriately. So, Mr. Robinson.
I did it before I was chair. I had to step aside. I think it's very rewarding. When it was our CAS, it's since changed. It was very rewarding. I volunteered. I think it's they do great work.
Okay. Anybody else have any inclination?
I was going to volunteer if nobody else did, but if, given Chuck has some continuity there, I'm not going to arm wrestle you for it. So, if you're willing to do it, that works for me.
Yeah, it's
once a month.
Wednesday, or once at 5:30 at the police station.
Yeah, it's generally not every Wednesday. It's once a month. Usually the last Wednesday of the month. There are a couple exceptions that are noted because of Christmas and Thanksgiving, but those are in the packet, and we'll make. There's one case that you won't be able to attend because we have a scheduled school committee meeting that night, which is Thursday night. But otherwise, you'd be okay to cover. Okay, so with that said, we'll assign Chuck as the liaison to the Reading Coalition Prevention and Support. Thank you, Chuck. All right, that concludes the items on our agenda. Carla, yes, please.
Per Robert's rules, for rescinding, repealing, or annulling votes, I'm providing notice. At our Thursday night's meeting, I will be making a motion for us to rescind the vote on the vice chair appointment and reorganize that position.
Okay. We'll have to look at that and make sure. I think I know what you're talking about, but...
It doesn't require, it requires a notice.
Okay. I'll look at that before, and if we need to, we've already posted for Thursday, but if we need to make an update, we can make an update tomorrow. I'll look at that with Colby real quick, just to make sure, and then we'll get that update appropriately made. All right. Is there anybody else has any other topics of discussion real quick? Nothing on the agenda, but I just wanted to talk through the calendar briefly, if people can. I mentioned it earlier, but we have some challenges coming up in September and October. We are currently planned to have a meeting on the 27th of September and a meeting on the 7th of October. Both have conflicts with other now planned town-related meetings. The September 27th one is now a special town meeting that we're hearing about, which technically will close, I think, and be posted by the 31st of this month. So as long as that happens, which I think people are expecting it to happen, we will not be able to meet that night, so we'll have to adjust. The other one is October 7th, and it's unfortunate that Ed just left because FinCom has scheduled the third of 3 financial forum meetings that night. And that usually involves us as well as the Select Board and Finance Committee. Unfortunately, those are our 2 back-to-back meetings in that week and a half that we have. So we'll have to adjust. And I know it's already been a challenging time for adjusting. Obviously, this week we adjusted from, the 30th to this week, and we're actually having 2 this week instead of 1 this week and next week. But I just wanted to let the committee know that that's a challenge, and we'll need to work around sometimes because there's still plenty of business we need to get done. So we might have to meet the 20th. I don't think we can meet the Thursday of that week because there's another conflict of September. We might have to meet the 4th of October. We'll have to figure it out, and I would ask that the committee be flexible with me, and I'll do my best to, and Tom and Sean, as we work to adjust the calendar appropriately to get the rest of these items in there. But it does mean those of us that are town meeting members and school committee members will have a pretty busy next 6 weeks to 8 weeks of our lives.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
So I see that one of the financial forums is on 9/23, which I believe is the back-to-school night at the high school. Are we obligated to be at the financial forum? Because I would very much like to attend the back-to-school night at the high school. I will have 3 back-to-school nights. So I just want to know if we're allowed to prioritize our kids over the financial forum.
Obligation is the answer to that question is no.
Okay.
Desired because they want the board input, and we will post for it.
Yeah.
Even if we don't meet quorum, we'll post for it, and if as many of us can attend that'd be good. I think it's important to note that there are some pretty important decisions that have to come up in those financial forums this year and in town meeting. With the COVID infrastructure money, I'm hearing, and we'll check if you're hearing otherwise, or Tom if you're hearing otherwise, but I think we're hearing about $7 million of COVID infrastructure money that we need to talk about what would make sense to be spent. And as you all know, there's plenty of school-related projects that money could benefit, from the turf to roof buildings to the floor in the high school gym to quite a few other things. Not to mention Birch Meadow that we would benefit from, and a few other things. So there's a lot of discussion that's going to happen in those forums on that topic.
Are they virtual or are they in person?
My understanding is they're going to be Zoom, virtual.
Okay. So one could always join a little late, correct?
Yep,
yes.
exactly. Okay. All right, so that's the last item I wanted to cover. Any last business from anybody else? Motion to adjourn. Do I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Sarah. All in favor? All opposed? None. 6-0 vote. 18. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.